Almost nothing is known about Derek Benson other than that he was born in Ireland in 1967 and was emotionally unstable throughout his life. There is no information about his parents or siblings. In his youth, he lived alone, which is not surprising given his explosive nature and sudden outbursts of anger. By a twist of fate, Derek crossed paths with Jackie Noble. We know little about her family and personal life, but there is information that since her teenage years, Jackie faced constant challenges. With a thin build, pale skin, and curly brown hair, she was a girl who never considered herself beautiful, which led to a number of complexes and self-doubt. To cope with shyness and low self-esteem, Jackie became addicted to alcohol at a very young age. She also began to experiment with illegal substances. Jackie did not stray from this chosen path even when she met Derek, and a romantic relationship soon developed between them. Moreover, they began to drink alcohol together. Those who knew Derek considered him to have an unstable character, sometimes aggressive, especially when he was drunk or under the influence of substances. Nevertheless, Jackie liked this rebellious spirit in him, and soon she moved with him to Ballymun, a northern suburb of Dublin. Their relationship was full of quarrels, and conflicts arose more and more frequently. According to Jackie, Derek was extremely cruel and sought to keep everything under his control. If she disobeyed him or did not do what he wanted, he insulted and beat her, even in front of others. Jackie hoped that their relationship would improve when their daughter, Kelly Noble, was born in 1986. Although at first, the arrival of the baby did contribute to taming Derek's violent temper, as the girl grew up, she too became the object of her father's uncontrollable anger. According to court records, in 1993, when Kelly was just over 6 years old, she was examined at the St. Clair's unit on Temple Street, which deals with suspected victims of bullying. However, the complaint filed with the Irish police was later withdrawn, as Jackie retracted her accusations. According to officers, Jackie changed her mind because Derek intimidated her. Additionally, some claim that he not only subjected her to physical and mental abuse but also forced her to assist him in using a whole arsenal of devices meant for illegal substances. Thus, the unfortunate child turned into another victim on whom the angry father could unleash his negative emotions and involve her in his perversions. Neighbors noticed how Derek humiliated and beat his partner, but apparently, no one took any measures to stop this violence. Claire, a woman who lived in a neighboring apartment, later reported that one day, upon seeing Jackie, she noticed her very swollen hand and asked what had happened. Jackie revealed that Derek had hit her with a board because she had not gotten up to make him breakfast. The neighbor also recalled an incident when Jackie ran to her for help, being pursued by her husband. According to Claire, she and her sister clearly saw how Derek beat and kicked Jackie, making her a victim once again. Claire advised Jackie to leave Derek, but she claimed that he threatened to kill her if she did. It is hard to believe that this unfortunate woman endured terrible abuse for 10 years. According to court documents, there is medical evidence that on various occasions, Jackie was hospitalized and treated for injuries sustained during beatings, including hematomas and broken ribs. Derek often abused Jackie, even when their little daughter was nearby. The girl described in detail how her father tied her mother to a chair or bed when he committed his disgusting acts. According to her story, he would wield a bag and threaten her with sharp objects, simulating abuse assault. The boiling point for Jackie came in 1997 when she finally mustered the courage to take her daughter and go to her parents in her hometown of Nouthcourt. Given the history of domestic violence in the family, Jackie quickly received a protection order against Derek. However, he soon violated it after the complaint was accepted. The police arrested him. Later, Jackie stated that Derek tried to knock her down and push her down the stairs at the police station in Ballymun. So, Derek spent some time behind bars. In early 2000, Jackie's parents died, and it seems she was due to inherit a considerable sum of money and her father's property. Although at the time they were divorced and she was still under a protective order, Derek somehow managed to get close to his ex-partner again, demand some of the money he believed belonged to him. He wanted to buy a motorcycle and a yacht. Derek could not imagine that his inflated ambitions would provoke the wrath of the seemingly submissive woman with whom he had lived for more than 14 years. His demand for a share of the money brought up all the grievances that had accumulated over their years together. At that time, a third character entered the story, Paul Hopkins. Paul made a living as a doorman at a bar in Drumcondra, where Jackie often went to relax. It seemed he had long been familiar with both her and Derek and lived relatively close to the apartment that them rented on Sandy Hill Avenue. At that time, Paul was living with a young woman and raising a daughter. According to rumors, Paul had been friends with Derek, but for unknown reasons, they became sworn enemies. According to subsequent statements from Paul, over the course of 4 years, Derek had threatened and attacked him at least 5 times. Paul claimed that one night Jackie came to the bar where he worked, and when he stepped outside to smoke, he saw her crying. When he asked her about the reason for her tears, Paul heard a story about the horrors Derek had committed against Jackie's, as well as Derek's desire to deprive her of her rightful inheritance. In addition, Jackie told Paul about Derek's alleged abuse of their daughter. There are 2 versions of what happened after this conversation. According to Paul, he deliberately proposed a plan to Jackie that would allow him to achieve 2 goals simultaneously. On one hand, he would free Jackie from a nightmare that had lasted for many years, and on the other hand, he would protect his own family. According to him, while he was in the city of Boston for educational courses, Derek allegedly threatened his girlfriend. Supposedly, the sadist told his girlfriend that he would burn her and her daughter after he was finished with them. For Paul, this meant that Derek would abuse his partner and child before taking their lives. The version later presented by investigators indicates that Jackie hired Paul to kill her violent partner. As a reward, she promised him between 3,000 to 5,000 Irish pounds. They met on May 11, 2000, to clarify the details of the crime they were preparing, and 2 days later, they carried it out. As part of their agreement, Jackie gave Paul an advance of 200 Irish pounds, equivalent to about 276 euros. At the meeting, Paul provided sleeping pills and a mobile phone so that she could warn him when Derek was vulnerable. That same day, Paul bought a Japanese katana sword from his brother. According to his own statement, his brother sold him the weapon for 50 Irish pounds, not suspecting that it would be used for murder. Finally, on May 13th of that year, Jackie and Paul executed their plan. That day, Derek was recovering from dental treatment in his apartment. Jackie showed up there, caringly offering him her help. However, instead of the prescribed painkillers, she gave Derek a cocktail of sleeping pills that had been provided by her accomplice. After assuring that everything was fine, Jackie called Paul, notifying him that the next stage of the plan was ready. She then left the apartment. Around 3 a.m., locals, including a neighbor, reported hearing screams from Derek's apartment. Shortly after that, they saw a column of smoke rising from the building and flames bursting from the fire, prompting them to call for help. Witnesses claimed they saw Paul leaving the apartment. When rescuers entered to find Derek and help him escape, they were met with a horrific sight. In the bedroom, they found the lifeless body of Derek covered in terrible wounds. He was pronounced dead. The investigation began quickly to uncover the truth behind this shocking incident. Officers cordoned off the area and began questioning local residents. Evidence collected at the scene and eyewitness accounts pointed to 2 suspects. Meanwhile, the remains of the victim were taken to the morgue for a thorough examination. Dr. Marie Cassidy, then deputy state pathologist, said Derek had 25 injuries to his head and neck. One of them was an open wound that cut into his cervical spine and a cutting or slashing wound, as if someone had tried to cut off his head. She said Derek had injuries to his arms, hands, severing several tendons. Several cuts to his forearms and palms consistent with defensive injuries. Dr. Cassidy said the injuries Benson suffered were consistent with a sustained and brutal attack. The direction of the wound suggested that, at some stage, the deceased had been lying on the ground during the attack. The report also concluded that the weapon used to commit the murder was likely a samurai sword, as the wounds were exceedingly deep. The sword was later found in a cupboard at the home of a close friend of Paul, who also worked with him. Paul and Jackie were brought to trial for their alleged involvement in the plot to murder Derek. In late January 2004, 38-year-old Jackie Noble and 24-year-old Paul Hopkins appeared at Dublin Central Criminal Court. However, both pleaded not guilty to the charges and were sentenced to 30 days. The court heard details of the physical and emotional abuse Jackie suffered at the hands of her former partner, who was also accused of allegedly abusing their young daughter. In her testimony, Jackie described how Derek had harmed her during his rages. Witnesses, including neighbors and relatives, confirmed that he regularly beat her. As evidence, the defendant's lawyer, Mary, presented records of Jackie's hospitalization due to domestic violence, as well as a restraining order that had been issued in her favor, which Derek later violated. To support her claims, Mary subpoenaed the police officer involved in Derek's arrest, who testified about an incident where Derek had attempted to push Jackie down the stairs at the police station. However, the trial judge ruled that psychological tests conducted on Jackie as part of her defense were inadmissible. Paul also spoke about the threats Derek had made against his ex-girlfriend, and detailed how Derek had repeatedly attacked her. When his defense attorney asked what he intended to do when he entered Derek's apartment with a sword, Paul replied that he only wanted to scare him. However, things escalated when Derek suddenly jumped out of bed and they began to fight. When the sword fell to the floor, Derek picked it up and threw it at Paul, cutting his fingers. In that moment, Paul lost control of himself, grabbed the weapon, and violently attacked Derek, after which he was unable to stop. Upon realizing what he had done, Paul was terrified. He described Derek as a psychopath, noting that he had drawn the child into his nightmarish actions, but Paul had never intended to kill him. However, prosecutor Tom O'Connell classified the case as a contract killing. According to him, Jackie had agreed with Paul on a payment of £3,000 to £5,000 for the elimination of Derek. Tom stated that while the accused intended to devise a plan for capture, it was executed in the most tragic manner. Tom told the Central Criminal Court jury that Mr. Benson had suffered 25 stab wounds with a sword and 60 cuts or slashing wounds. In 7 stab wounds to the torso, the sword had passed through the entire body from back to front and from front to back. The number of injuries sustained by the victim due to his unexpected reaction was so extensive that Paul decided to set fire to the apartment in an attempt to hide the evidence, which was beyond the original plan. The prosecutor also told the Central Criminal Court jury that Jackie's motive was to protect herself and her daughter from an insane man. The jury also heard evidence from pathologist Marie Cassidy, who read her statement for almost an hour. In her statement, she noted that the multiple injuries sustained by the victim were inflicted during a brutal and sustained attack. In addition to this evidence, the prosecution was based on the fact that the perpetrators had planned the murder in advance. This was substantiated by the purchase of sleeping pills, a samurai sword for the murder, and a telephone for communication between them during the commission of the crime. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury in the Central Criminal Court unanimously found the accused guilty of murder. The judge sentenced Jackie Noble and Paul Hopkins to life in prison. After the verdict was announced, both Jackie and Paul cried. Jackie's relatives and friends also cried. Jackie was sent to the Women's Centre in Mountjoy Prison in Dublin, while Paul was to serve his sentence in Luffin House Prison in County Cavan. One might think that with the imprisonment of Jackie and Paul, the murder would be classified as one of the most brutal crimes in Ireland. However, the cycle of violence in which the family of the deceased was involved led to unthinkable consequences for one of the most vulnerable characters in this story, Jackie's daughter, Kelly, who was left to cope with the death of her father and the arrest of her mother. She was hospitalized and subsequently transferred to a state facility in Laytown, County Meath. At that time, she had already given birth to a daughter. Unfortunately, she repeated many of the fates of her parents. She broke the law several times. Kelly received more than 10 sentences for various crimes, including theft, possession of illegal substances, and bladed weapons. The most serious crime occurred in June 2006 when she, 20, was jailed for manslaughter and the stabbing of a 19-year-old. She was initially sentenced to 10 years in prison, with the last 2 years suspended. However, an appeals court reduced the sentence to 8 years, with 2 suspended years. While serving her sentence, Kelly ended up behind bars with her mother. Jackie used her imprisonment to finally give up drinking and ban substance, which she regarded as her great achievement. One would think that being in prison and witnessing the positive example set by her mother would lead Kelly to learn a lesson, but this was not the case. After 6 years, in 2012, Kelly was released, but her problems with the law did not end. In September 2017, she was arrested after a series of thefts and attempted thefts in South Great George's Street. Meanwhile, after 14 years, Jackie, who was then 51 years old, was released in June 2018. She tried to find a job in Dublin and spent a lot of time with her family, taking care of her grandchildren. In an interview, Jackie noted that nothing could change what had happened, but she would like to write a book about her story and the domestic violence that many Irish women face in silence. Kelly faced problems again in October 2020 when she was accused of robbing a woman of her bag and cash. She was sentenced to additional months in prison for breaking and entering, but she was released after being found pregnant. The story of this crime, deemed one of the worst, took another turn in 2022. After serving 2 years in prison for the murder of Derek Benson with a samurai sword, Paul was released from Logan House Prison in County Cavan. This happened just before Christmas. Jackie and Paul are now on parole, with the possibility that their life sentences could be reactivated if they commit another crime. Although Jackie was not directly the perpetrator of the murder, her name was included in a list of the most dangerous women in Ireland. For some, Jackie's decision to hire Paul to do the violent work was the result of many years of prolonged violence that she suffered. As the judge who sentenced them stated, Derek's actions, no matter how terrible, reflect a familiar but often ignored moral. Those embroiled in cycles of violence can find it extremely difficult to escape the path of self-destruction. Leilani Marie Beecham, a Carmel native, was a 19-year-old college student in San Jose. On October 29, 2021, Halloween weekend was in full swing, and Leilani headed out to Sacramento to enjoy the festivities. Fairfield is just a short drive away, and she spent the night with friends. She was last spotted during the early morning hours of October 30th. Accompanied by 2 acquaintances, both active members of the U.S. Air Force, she left the party and headed to a residence on Cascade Lane in Fairfield, a location she'd visited before. Her sudden absence set off alarm bells within her family. By Saturday evening, around 6 p.m., her family contacted the Fairfield Police Department to report her missing. More than 100 miles south, in Monterey County, authorities would uncover a grim scene. But before diving deeper, let's take a moment to remember who Leilani was. Leilani Marie Beecham was born on June 12, 2002, in Long Beach, California. Raised in El Dorado Hills and later a graduate of Carmel Valley High School, she was the eldest of 3 children. Her siblings looked up to her. Her family calls her a blessing. To her friends, she is warm and full of energy. She was pursuing her dreams in San Jose, navigating the world of higher education while staying rooted in a deeply connected family life. Leilani reached out to her loved ones daily, constantly checking in, showing love in the simplest and most profound ways. Leilani didn't wander off into the unknown. She only went to people she trusted. She had been to that house before. Saturday, October 30th. Her family grows increasingly uneasy. The day passes with no word from her. That night, they filed a missing person report, still hoping she would return safely. But that hope began to fade. At approximately 5:30 p.m. on Sunday, October 31st, something unusual caught the eye of someone near a quiet roadside in Monterey County. Down a steep hillside, not an animal, not debris, but what appeared to be a human form wrapped tightly in a blanket. Whether the discovery was made by a passerby, a hiker, or someone acting on a tip remains unclear. What is certain, however, is that law enforcement responded swiftly. Crews from the Monterey County Sheriff's Office arrived on the scene and quickly confirmed what no one wanted to believe: the remains were those of Leilani Beecham. Just hours earlier, she had been reported missing. Now, she had become the victim of a murder investigation. The mystery that began in Sacramento had spread throughout Fairfield and deep into Monterey County. Although authorities had withheld the identity of the 911 caller, they later admitted it was an anonymous caller. The Fairfield Police Department was on alert, Now with this devastating development, working alongside Monterey County investigators and officials from Travis Air Force Base, the case had grown far beyond a simple missing persons report. In Salinas, people were stunned. One local resident, interviewed shortly after the discovery, expressed disbelief, saying that in nearly 3 decades of living in the area, they had never seen anything like it. Another resident, who walks the same route every day, could not believe such a horrific act could have happened right in their own backyard. Meanwhile, the Leilani family received news no parent should ever hear. How does a 19-year-old go from attending a festive party in Sacramento to being found discarded along a remote road near Salinas, over 100 miles away, in under 48 hours? Investigators quickly honed in on her last known movements. She was last seen in the early hours of Saturday morning, leaving a Halloween party in Sacramento with 2 men she knew, both affiliated with Travis Air Force Base. Their destination was a house on Cascade Road in Fairfield. Recognizing the urgency, Fairfield police wasted no time. They partnered with Travis AFB's Office of Special Investigations, given the military connection, and Monterey County officials, since that's where her body had been discovered. It became a coordinated effort across departments and county lines. The first step was to get a search warrant for the house on Cascade Road. The scene was not one of routine questioning, it was a full-scale forensic operation. Officers combed through the house for hours. Roommates were interviewed, and one of them, Damian Ponders, shared crucial information. Though he claimed not to have been home when events transpired, he confirmed that Leilani had been there before and had a connection to one of the men she had left the party with, Juan Peralta, a 20-year-old active-duty airman at Travis Air Force Base, working as a cargo specialist. Investigators soon learned that Juan Peralta was in a relationship with another woman, Jessica Quintanilla, a 21-year-old from Pittsburgh, California. Piecing together Leilani's final known hours became a priority. Detectives established that she had left the Sacramento party around 2 a.m. on Saturday with Peralta and Ponders. By 3 or 4 a.m., she was at the Cascade Lane residence. After that point, communication from her ceased. No calls. No messages. Investigators began analyzing phone records, tracking cell tower pings, and looking into the digital trail left behind. That's when Jessica's name came up again. Her phone had also pinged in Fairfield on that Saturday morning. Even more telling, her brother, Marco Quintanilla, had also shown up in the data. He was 27 years old and on parole for a prior conviction. His phone location data painted a curious picture. His signal moved from Fairfield to Monterey County during the same time frame as Leilani's disappearance. The paths of tracked mobile devices have shed light on a journey that led to Leilani's end on a deserted hillside near Salinas. Evidence from the Cascade Lane search only deepened suspicions. While police remained tight-lipped about specific findings, court documents later revealed something unsettling: clear signs of a physical altercation and an attempted cleanup. Traces of blood were found inside the house that belonged to Leilani. Then came another digital breadcrumb. Marco Quintanilla, already being monitored via an ankle bracelet due to his parole, had left behind an irrefutable trail. GPS data from the device shows he entered a route that stretched from Fairfield to Salinas during the crucial time period, ending exactly where Leilani's remains were found. In fact, it's a piece of evidence captured in location data, not words. Every ping, every timestamp, every location brings investigators closer to the truth. As investigators intensified their probe, OSI agents and Fairfield detectives began questioning Juan Peralta and the second airman who had been with Leilani that night. Juan's account quickly raised eyebrows. While he admitted to being at the Cascade Lane house, he became evasive when asked for details. In contrast, the other airman appeared more cooperative, though he remained a background figure in the early stages of the investigation. By Monday, November 1st, the pieces were beginning to form a disturbing picture. Detectives confirmed that Jessica Quintanilla and Juan were in a romantic relationship, a fact supported by mutual acquaintances and corroborated by Damian Ponders, Juan's roommate. Jessica's brother, Marco, also became a focal point as data from his parole-mandated ankle monitor aligned with the timeline of events, tracing his movements from Fairfield to Monterey County. All signs pointed back to the Cascade Lane residence. Detectives began to suspect that tensions may have erupted inside that home. Perhaps a moment of jealousy, a heated argument, or something more calculated had taken place. While prosecutors later considered a love triangle as a possible motive, authorities were not entirely convinced. However, they had gathered enough information to act. Late that Monday night, Fairfield police executed coordinated arrests in Pittsburgh, a city roughly 40 miles from Fairfield. Jessica and Marco Quintanilla were both taken into custody. Jessica was identified as the primary suspect, with prosecutors alleging that she had pulled the trigger. Marco, they claimed, had helped her conceal the crime. Juan, meanwhile, was arrested at Travis Air Force Base under suspicion of withholding vital information. But the arrests were just the beginning. Investigators moved swiftly to collect supporting evidence. Jessica's phone was seized, Marco's ankle monitor data combed through, and Juan's residence was thoroughly examined. Text messages exchanged between Jessica and Marco on the morning of Saturday, October 30th, hinted at something ominous. Phrases like "it's done" and "meet me" raised immediate suspicion. Furthermore, GPS data from Marco's monitor placed him near Corral de Tierra Road on Sunday afternoon, well before the 911 call that led deputies to Leilani's body. Though one wasn't formally charged at first, OSI agents and local detectives kept him under close observation. The second airman, after further questioning, was eventually released without charges. Jessica Quintanilla was a 21-year-old mother of a 2-year-old boy living in Pittsburgh, California. She wasn't affiliated with the military but had been romantically involved with Juan for some time. According to friends, she was passionate and at times, emotionally volatile. Marco Quintanilla, her older brother, had a violent history. He had previously been convicted of attempted murder, a felony offense under California law. He was on parole at the time of Leilani's death, required to wear a GPS ankle monitor that would later become a critical piece of evidence. Juan Peralta, originally from Mexico, had moved to California as a child. By 19, he had enlisted in the U.S. Air Force and was working as a cargo specialist at Travis Air Force Base. Roommates described him as quiet and reserved, someone who kept to himself. Jessica faced the most severe charge, murder with a special allegation for using a firearm. Prosecutors alleged that she was the one who shot Leilani inside the Cascade Lane home during the early hours of October 30th. Marco was charged as an accessory to murder, accused of helping transport Leilani's body more than 100 miles south and assisting in the cleanup. Juan received a lesser charge, accessory after the fact, for allegedly being aware of the crime and failing to report it. On Tuesday, November 2nd, Juan was released on $25,000 bail and returned to Travis AFB under supervision. Jessica and Marco, however, were denied bail and held at Solano County Jail, facing the full weight of the legal system. At this point, investigators were still piecing together how Leilani, Juan, and Jessica all ended up at the same place, at the same time. Juan later explained that he had thrown a surprise birthday party for Jessica on October 9th, though their relationship became strained shortly afterward. They had separated for a period in October after a serious argument, and Juan had told Jessica that he planned to move out of the Cascade Lane residence. He instructed her to collect her belongings from the property. Then came October 30th. Leilani Beacham was reported missing, and a tragic sequence of events that may have stemmed from broken relationships, jealousy, and rage had already been set in motion. In the early morning hours of October 30th, Leilani Beacham accompanied Juan Peralta to his off-base residence on Cascade Lane in Fairfield. Not long after they arrived, Jessica Quintanilla entered the house. According to trial testimony later provided by Peralta, who would ultimately become a central witness for the prosecution, Jessica had come to the home to retrieve her belongings following a recent separation from Juan. However, what was meant to be a brief visit quickly escalated into a deadly confrontation. Inside the bedroom, Jessica allegedly found Juan and Leilani lying in bed together. The sight of the two set off what prosecutors described as a violent outburst fueled by jealousy. According to Peralta's account, Jessica, upon entering the room, momentarily stepped out after grabbing a bracelet. Within half a minute, she returned, this time holding a semi-automatic handgun. Standing just a few feet from where Leilani lay, Jessica fired a single, fatal shot. The bullet struck Leilani in the head, killing her instantly. During the trial, Dr. Arnold Jose Len, a pathologist from Fairfield who performed the autopsy, confirmed that the wound was consistent with a close-range gunshot, with the bullet entering the left side of Leilani's head and exiting through the right. Peralta testified that Jessica threatened him immediately after the shooting, warning that she would kill him if he did not help dispose of the body. Under pressure, the two wrapped Leilani's body in a blanket. Later that morning, they visited a local Home Depot, where they purchased a tarp, though it remained unclear whether it was ultimately used in the disposal. From there, they transported the body south, over 100 miles away, to a remote area near Corral de Tierra Road in Monterey County. They stopped just off the roadside and concealed Leilani's body about 10 yards into the vegetation. According to prosecutors, Jessica's brother, Marco Quintanilla, played a role in helping to cover up the crime. Evidence suggests there were discussions between them about how best to conceal the body. The trial, held in Solano County Superior Court under Judge William Pendergast, finally commenced in late 2024 after facing multiple delays. A jury was impaneled to decide the fate of both Jessica and Marco. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney Ilana Shapiro, argued that the motive stemmed from a love triangle. Jessica, they claimed, was driven by jealousy over Peralta's involvement with Leilani. The state charged her with felony murder, accompanied by a special allegation of firearm use. Marco faced charges as an accessory after the fact, in addition to being a felon in possession of a firearm. The strength of the prosecution's case lay not only in Juan Peralta's testimony but also in the physical and digital evidence presented in court. The autopsy results highlighted the close-quarters nature of the shooting, while the discovery and recovery of Leilani's body near Salinas matched the phone records and GPS data retrieved from Marco's ankle monitor. These coordinates confirmed that Marco traveled from his Fairfield home to the dumpster during the crucial time frame. Shapiro emphasized Jessica's cold demeanor throughout the 5-week trial, stating to jurors that not once did she express remorse or shed a tear for the victim. The prosecution argued that the deliberate act of retrieving a firearm before returning to the bedroom proved intent, nullifying the defense's claim that the killing had been spontaneous or driven by a momentary emotional surge. As for Marco, the state painted a picture of complicity. His presence at a later meeting in Pittsburgh, along with his criminal record and parole status, were presented as evidence that he was willing to help rather than being forced. In Jessica's defense, attorney William Allen Welch questioned the credibility of Peralta's testimony, portraying him as a manipulative figure who may have played a larger role than he admitted. Welch pointed to inconsistencies in Peralta's initial statements to law enforcement, including that he had not even seen Leilani on the night of the incident. He also suggested that the weapon used in the murder may have been Peralta's own. The defense asked jurors to consider whether the shooting could have been an impulsive act in the heat of passion, an emotional reaction to a betrayal rather than a premeditated murder. Welch argued that the volatile nature of Jessica and Juan's relationship created a storm. Yet the evidence against Marco remained difficult to dismiss. His court-mandated ankle monitor had essentially chronicled his every move during the critical hours of the crime and its aftermath. The data clearly showed that he had traveled from the crime scene in Fairfield to the remote area in Monterey County where Leilani's body was eventually discovered. This digital trail points to a well-coordinated cover-up, prosecutors said. Marco Quintanilla's ankle monitor showed clear timestamps placing him in Fairfield on the morning of October 30th, 2021, just after Leilani Beacham was last seen alive at the Cascade Lane residence. Over the following 24 hours, his recorded movements tracked a path southward. By October 31st, his location data placed him near Corral de Tierra Road in the Salinas area of Monterey County, approximately 100 miles from Fairfield. This was the same remote stretch of road where, just one day later, Leilani's body would be discovered hidden along a hillside. This digital footprint matched the prosecution's timeline perfectly, leading to the theory that Marco helped his sister, Jessica Quintanilla, move and dispose of Leilani's body after the fatal shooting. Closing arguments were delivered on November 13, 2024. Just 2 days later, on November 15th, the jury returned its verdict. Jessica Quintanilla was found guilty of felony murder. The jury's decision indicated that they rejected the defense's claim of a spontaneous act driven by intense emotion. Instead, they agreed with the prosecution's framing of the crime as calculated and deliberate. Judge William Pendergast sentenced Jessica to 25 years, a sentence that underscored the severity of the act and the lasting consequences of her choices. Unlike his sister, Marco did not face a jury trial. On January 17, 2025, he entered a plea deal, admitting guilt to the accessory charge. Judge Pendergast sentenced him to 4 years in state prison, a term that factored in the over 3 years he had already spent in custody since his initial arrest. The plea deal allowed Marco to avoid the possibility of a longer sentence had he gone to trial and been convicted. As for Juan Parra Peralta, he was never formally charged with murder or any serious felony by the Solano County District Attorney's Office. Instead, he was offered immunity in exchange for his cooperation. His testimony became central to the prosecution's case. He claimed under oath that Jessica had shot Leilani, threatened him at gunpoint, and demanded that he assist her in disposing of the body in Monterey County. While he avoided criminal charges, his freedom came at a cost. Juan was still an active duty cargo specialist stationed at Travis Air Force Base at the time of the crime. Following the trial, both he and his roommate, Damian Ponders, another airman who lived at the Cascade Lane residence but was never criminally charged, were discharged from the United States Air Force. The discharges were classified as less than honorable, reflecting the military's internal disciplinary response to their connection to the case, regardless of their legal standing. The murder of Leilani Marie Beecham is a stark reminder of how quickly personal relationships can turn violent. A young woman, just 19 years old, with dreams, ambitions, and a loving family, was robbed of her life in a moment of anger. Her death left her family devastated and traumatized. It began as an ordinary evening. Patrick Sean Betts, an 11-year-old boy from Upland, San Bernardino, California, was at his favorite pizza place with his mom and sister. He was cheerful, laughing, and enjoying activities that many kids in the 80s loved. Patrick asked his mom for some change and went to play in the arcade at the back. Everything seemed normal until he walked out of the pizza place and never returned home. What truly happened that night? Why did it take so long for anyone to search for him? How did a case with so many puzzling details go unnoticed for such a long time? Patrick was born on June 21, 1976, to Dennis and Barbara Betts, who had lived in Upland for many years. He grew up in an environment full of love, enjoying skateboards, and a kind of freedom. Patrick attended Sierra Vista Elementary School, where his vibrant personality shone brightly despite his small stature. His mom, Barbara, described him as cheerful and easygoing, while his friends saw him as playful and street smart. He was polite, helpful, and naturally curious. He often spending time at the local Radio Shack. His humor was surprisingly mature for his age, making people laugh and keeping them wanting to be around him. One of the most important people in Patrick's life was his best friend Kevin Charlebois, who lived just across the street. Kevin has health problems that keep him homebound. Not many kids try to connect with him, but Patrick really cares and makes an effort to help his friend. The two became best friends, bonded by trust and kindness. Like many kids at that time, Patrick enjoyed video games, baseball, and skateboarding. His friendship with Kevin deepened his love for baseball, especially since Kevin's dad coached the local Little League team. Patrick couldn't sleep at night without his favorite blanket, which brought him comfort and a sense of security. Then came January 20th, 1988, a day that the Betts family would always remember. It started like any other day. Patrick, his mother Barbara, and his older sister Pamela were having dinner at Pizza Chalet, a popular family restaurant in Upland that had an arcade. As usual, Patrick rushed to the games after asking his mom for some quarters. He had recently made friends with the owner's son, and they spent hours playing together. Although Barbara didn't know this new friend very well, she felt comfortable letting Patrick go play. Later that evening, Patrick asked his mom if he could go to a basketball game at Upland High with a friend. Thinking it was nearby and trusting her son, Barbara agreed. As he left, he asked her to save him a slice of pizza. It was a typical, light-hearted request, a moment any parent would smile at, but it turned out to be the last time Barbara saw her son. The game was actually in Chino, nearly 8 miles away, a fact the boys were unaware of. Disappointed, they returned to Pizza Chalet and spent time at the arcade. Patrick was last seen around 9 p.m. playing video games there. After that, he said he was going home, but he never arrived. That night, his family waited anxiously, hoping he would walk in, perhaps a bit embarrassed for being late. But hours went by, and then the entire night passed. When morning came, it brought only worry that Patrick was missing. One would expect the local police to conduct a thorough investigation right away, but that didn't happen. Instead, Upland authorities quickly dismissed the situation, suggesting that Patrick had run away. They told his distraught family he would return when he got hungry. This idea seemed ridiculous to Barbara and Dennis. Yes, Patrick had been involved in a minor school issue shortly before he disappeared. He had a juvenile court date approaching, but he wasn't anxious about it. He had never stated any desire to run away, and his behavior didn't suggest he planned to. In fact, his favorite blanket, something he always needed at night, was still in his room, and his clothes and belongings were untouched. If Patrick had truly run away, wouldn't he have taken something with him? But investigators stuck to their runaway theory. There were no Amber Alerts, no immediate search efforts, and no sense of urgency. Upland was not the safest place, with a population of just over 48,000 and a crime rate slightly above the national average. On average, 5 serious crimes occurred daily, which raised concerns, especially with a child missing. The Betts family was determined to prevent their son from becoming just another missing person case. They began their own search, going door to door in Upland, distributing flyers and asking anyone who might have information. Their first stop was Pizza Chalet, the last place Patrick had been seen. They sought leads and eventually caught a break. A woman from a nearby beauty supply store recalled seeing Patrick enter with an older teenage boy. Initially, this seemed promising, but her memory became unclear. She wavered between being sure and unsure, at one point forgetting whether Patrick was alone. The Betts family thought the boy might be the son of the pizzeria owner, but since the witness could not provide a clear description, they couldn't confirm anything. This lead quickly unraveled, leaving them back at square one. The emotional strain was overwhelming. As time passed, the family grew more frantic and their appeals to the police became increasingly urgent, emphasizing that Patrick had not run away. After nearly 4 months of relentless effort, the authorities finally agreed to carry out a full investigation, but by that time, crucial months had already passed. In cases of missing persons, the first 48 to 72 hours are crucial. This is when evidence is still fresh, and the chances of finding the person alive are significantly higher. After this period, the chances of getting answers or finding the person decrease sharply. The Betts family was aware of this urgency. While they were relieved that law enforcement was finally involved, they couldn't shake the feeling that the delay had cost them dearly. Their heartbreak was worsened by the lack of media attention. Initially, the police categorized Patrick as a runaway, leading to minimal coverage. Only a few articles were published, and there was virtually no interest from television or local news. It felt as if Patrick had been forgotten even before the search had truly begun. However, the family remained determined and never stopped looking for anything unusual. The day after Patrick disappeared, an unsettling event occurred. Sierra Vista Elementary School received a phone call from a woman claiming to be Patrick's grandmother. She informed the school that Patrick would not be returning because he was moving to Washington to live with her. The call was alarming for a couple of reasons. First, the voice did not belong to his real grandmother. Second, the caller had specific knowledge, including the name of Patrick's school and the fact that his actual grandmother had previously lived in Washington. In truth, Patrick's grandmother had moved from Washington to California months before he went missing, and she had been struggling with cancer. Patrick loved spending time with her and always helped her when he could. Unfortunately, she passed away without knowing what happened to her grandson. This eerie phone call left the family distressed. Was it an attempt to mislead the investigation or a cruel joke? Regardless, it added to the increasing number of mysteries surrounding Patrick's disappearance. Since it was 1988, there were no means to trace the call, no caller ID or digital records, leading to yet another dead end. The strange events didn't end there. For months after Patrick's disappearance, something unusual occurred at the Pizza Chalet. This previously busy spot for local families suddenly closed down without any notice. The owners packed their things and left Upland unexpectedly. It was soon discovered that they had moved to Los Angeles, but when the police tried to find them, they lived together, the family, only for a brief period. Shortly after, they departed again, reportedly heading overseas to the Middle East, which is their country of origin. For the Betts family, this situation was not just peculiar, but very concerning. They wondered why a successful business would shut down so abruptly and why the owners would leave so quickly. Investigators were able to locate the owners of Pizza Chalet, but their lead was short-lived. After they left the country, all leads went cold again. Moreover, the identity of their son, the same boy who had been seen playing with Patrick that night, remained unknown. This meant that the police could not conduct an interview with him. Once again, the Betts family faced a dead end. Their frustration increased, as it felt like they were trapped in an unending nightmare. Every potential lead led to confusion or silence. Just when they thought the situation couldn't get worse, the police made a decision that completely shocked the family. Investigators in Upland unexpectedly focused on Patrick's older brother as a suspect in his disappearance, despite him being only 15 years old at the time. The police became convinced of his involvement without providing any evidence to support their claims. On the night Patrick went missing, his brother was in San Francisco, hundreds of miles away, performing with his band. His bandmates confirmed he was on stage for the entire evening, which ruled him out as a suspect. However, the police took him in for questioning without informing his family, keeping him for over 5 hours. When the Betts family learned of this and arrived at the station, they found him undergoing a polygraph test, which he reportedly did not pass. Things worsened from there. Officers pressured him to write a confession despite not having any valid reason to do so. The Betts family was outraged. They were already grieving Patrick's loss, and now they had to witness their other son being emotionally devastated by unfounded accusation. This traumatic experience left lasting effects. Patrick's brother, who already struggled with anxiety, later developed PTSD. Unfortunately, rather than receiving sympathy, his trauma was misinterpreted by the community as an indication of guilt, when it was actually the result of being wrongfully accused at a young age. This was not the last time Upland investigators disrupted the Betts family's life. In 1991, over 3 years after Patrick disappeared, the family was suddenly awakened before dawn by loud knocks and flashing lights at 6 a.m. The police had returned, this time with a search warrant. Confused, the family looked out to see their home surrounded by officers, bloodhounds, and even people in hazmat suits. They received no warning or explanation. The search lasted more than 12 hours, continuing into the evening. Every room in the house was inspected, and the backyard was thoroughly searched, all without any information about what the investigators were looking for. Months later, they discovered the reason for the search. An anonymous tip had been received, claiming that Patrick's body was buried somewhere under the house. Without confirming the validity of this tip, the investigators proceeded and treated the family as if they were suspects. The experience left the family devastated. Patrick's sister described the officers as lacking any compassion. Their search produced no results, and the leads they received went nowhere, leaving the family without answers. Patrick's case remained largely overlooked. It received minimal media coverage, with no televised appeals, no headlines, and only a few articles in local newspapers. One of the few times Patrick's face gained wider attention was in 1993 when his photo appeared in the music video for Soul Asylum's Runaway Train. This video was part of a campaign to raise awareness about missing children. Patrick's image flickered on screen alongside 35 other missing children, hoping someone might recognize him. While the campaign had some success, 26 of the 36 children featured were found. It did not lead to Patrick's return. As the years went by, the case went cold. Then, something unusual occurred that added to the mystery of Patrick's disappearance. One day, while working as a security officer, Patrick's grown nephew encountered an older man who engaged him in small talk. At first, the conversation seemed normal until the stranger referred to Patrick as Sean, his middle name, which only family and close friends used. And the nephew had never disclosed that detail. What happened next was even more unsettling. The man started speaking about Patrick's case as if he had been following it closely for years. He recited facts and details that sent chills down the nephew's spine. After all, Patrick's disappearance had only gained attention from a brief mention in a music video from the early 90s, and his story was mostly unknown. How could a stranger not only know Patrick's name but also intricate details about a case that few people discussed? Some speculated that the man might have heard of Patrick growing up in Upland, suggesting it could just be local knowledge shared over the years. However, Patrick's family wasn't convinced. They had always felt that his case was overlooked, not something that would stick in the minds of strangers, especially after so many years. Unfortunately, no one could identify the man or determine where he came from. He disappeared just as quickly as he arrived, leaving only discomfort and lingering questions. In February 2022, after many years of inactivity, Patrick's case received renewed attention through the internet. A true crime YouTube channel highlighted Patrick's story after a viewer from Upland requested it. That same month, an emotional city council meeting in Upland featured Patrick's 73-year-old mother, Barbara, and his sister, Pamela, who sought help from the mayor and council members, was also there to share Patrick's story with the officials, hoping for answers. During the meeting, Barbara shared a heartbreaking moment. Her husband, Dennis, Patrick's father, had died in 2009 without ever knowing what happened to their son. With a trembling voice, she expressed that although she no longer believed Patrick was alive, she held on to one final wish: to bring him home, even if it was just to lay him to rest. After over 30 years, her pain had not diminished, it had only deepened. Pamela made a strong appeal as well, urging law enforcement to utilize modern investigative techniques, such as DNA profiling and forensic databases, that were unavailable years ago. She argued that advancements in technology had increased the chances of solving cold cases. However, investigators faced the same challenge as before. Without a suspect or person of interest, they couldn't collect DNA. Nevertheless, there was a shift in the situation. After years of inaction, new interest in the case emerged. Detectives began to revisit witness statements and explore potential leads. While significant breakthroughs hadn't yet occurred, this renewed focus gave the Betts family something they hadn't felt in years: hope. Barbara's health was unfortunately declining. Pamela shared that they were now racing against time, not just to uncover the mystery, but to provide her mother with the closure she had been waiting for far too long. Today would have been Patrick's 48th birthday. The likelihood that he is still alive seems lower, yet the possibility that he was abducted and raised by someone else remains in their minds. If he were alive, wouldn't he have come forward by now? Nonetheless, hope remains strong. Even if Patrick has passed away, the Betts family is determined to find the truth. They seek to understand what happened, to achieve justice, and to find peace. On January 17, 1999, a man called 911 to report that he had found a woman unresponsive in her home. He was a friend of the victim, Miriam Illes, and had gone to check on her because she hadn't been answering his calls. When he arrived at her house, he discovered that it was locked, and none of the doors would open. Looking through a window, he saw Miriam lying on the kitchen floor, clearly deceased. When the police arrived and entered the house, they found that she had been attacked in the back, specifically targeting her heart area. Investigators spoke with the man who called 911, who provided details about Miriam. She was a homemaker and had previously worked in the medical field. Miriam was active in her local community, and her friends were worried about her that day because she hadn't attended Sunday school. She was well-liked and devoted mother to a young boy, Richie. Everyone who knew her believed she had no enemies, which made her death in her locked kitchen even more perplexing. Determining Miriam's time of death was crucial, but without witnesses, the exact timing was uncertain. Police officers meticulously searched the crime scene for evidence, noting that the house appeared undisturbed and showed no signs of forced entry. All external doors to the house and garage were locked when Miriam's body was found. A telephone receiver lay near her hand, suggesting that she may have been on the phone when she was attacked, potentially catching her off guard and leaving her unaware of her attacker. Investigators also requested a report from the phone company to find out about Miriam's recent calls. While examining the crime scene to determine how the attacker entered and exited the house, detectives made a significant discovery. They found a bullet hole in a double-glazed window located just above the kitchen sink. This indicated that the person who shot Miriam was positioned outside. It appeared that Miriam had been standing, leaning against the sink, talking on the phone when she was shot. This single bullet became the key piece of evidence. Tracing the bullet's path, investigators followed it to a creek bed behind Miriam's house. As the investigation progressed, the forensics team found footprints left by size 14 Reebok basketball shoes. The placement of the tracks suggested that someone had taken a shooting stance next to a tree located right behind the kitchen window. The detectives also found a cigarette butt at the shooting site. Further searching revealed a homemade silencer, leading investigators to conclude that the crime was premeditated. The attacker had been hiding behind the tree, waiting for the right moment, smoking a cigarette, and seemed to act with intent. However, the motive behind the crime remained unclear. It did not appear that Miriam was involved in any illegal activities or taking risks that would endanger her. Investigators aimed to gather more information from Miriam's husband, Richard Illes, who arrived at the crime scene while they were there. Richard was a well-known cardiothoracic surgeon at Williamsport Hospital and had saved many lives. He met Miriam in the early 90s while serving as a resident at St. Louis Medical Center, where she worked as a surgical assistant. After marrying, they had a son named Richie and moved to Williamsport, where they both worked together. Miriam was active in her community, engaging in volunteer work at the Symphony and church. Her vibrant personality made her well-liked among friends. Despite their wealth and status, Miriam's friends described her as down-to-earth, noting that they were among the richest people in Williamsport. Then she decided to become a stay-at-home mom, quitting her job when Richie was 2 years old and never returning to work. When Miriam was murdered in her own home, Richard became a primary focus for investigators. He told them that the last time he saw Miriam was 2 days earlier, on Friday, January 15, 1999, around 5 p.m., when he visited her before planning to travel to Chester County, Pennsylvania, to visit family. Detectives soon learned that Miriam and Richard had recently separated after 8 years of marriage, with Miriam moving out of their family home to the house where she was later found dead. She had primary custody of their son, Richie, while Richard visited the boy every weekend. Their ongoing divorce raised potential motives, prompting investigators to closely examine their relationship. Richard's behavior struck detectives as unusual. The first question he asked upon learning of Miriam's death was about the evidence that had been found, which seemed odd for someone who had just learned that his wife of 8 years and the mother of his child was dead. Additionally, Richard made an intriguing confession. He was familiar with firearms, having participated in hunting and owned guns, a common practice in the area. There was nothing particularly unusual about this admission. Investigators examined Richard's firearms to check for any connections to the crime scene. They determined that the bullet that killed Miriam was a .22 caliber, indicating the type of weapon they needed to find. Richard had several .22 caliber rifles, which the police confiscated for analysis. He became the primary suspect due to having a motive, access to weapons, and the skills necessary to commit the crime. The intense emotions in romantic relationships can shift from love to hate, which could have played a role in Miriam's death. While the weapon was being analyzed in the forensic lab, investigators looked further into Richard's personal life. As a cardiothoracic surgeon, he had a high income, but he was also paying a significant amount in child support, around $112,000 a month. This financial burden could have motivated him to want his wife dead. Investigators sought to clarify Richard's whereabouts at the time Miriam was attacked. Although Richard was supposed to pick up his son Richie that Friday evening, he opted to spend the weekend with his sister, who lived 2.5 hours away in Honeybrook, Pennsylvania. He had a witness, Nancy Mitch, who could confirm the start of his trip. Nancy informed the investigators that she was with Miriam when Miriam handed over her son, Richie, to Richard. He picked up Richie around 5 p.m., and after Nancy left, Miriam seemed to be fine. The last confirmed sighting of Miriam was around 6 p.m. on Friday, January 15th. The police established that Richard took Richie from Miriam's home and left while Miriam stayed behind, and everything seemed normal. Richard told investigators that he made a quick stop before going to his sister's house. He first stopped at his own home around 9:30 p.m. and then traveled toward southeastern Pennsylvania. He stated that they reached Lewisburg and stopped at a fast food restaurant around 10 p.m. due to bad weather that evening. He called his sister at 11:24 p.m. to inform her that they would spend the night near Harrisburg. Nancy confirmed part of Richard's alibi, prompting detectives to verify the rest of his statements. They checked Richard's cell phone records, which confirmed his call to his sister. He also had a hotel receipt from the Harrisburg area, where he checked in at 12:57 a.m. This corroborated Richard's account, indicating that he could not have been at the crime scene when Miriam was attacked. An examination of Richard's rifles showed that none matched the murder weapon, and the silencer found at the crime scene did not fit any of his rifles either. Furthermore, DNA samples from the silencer and a cigarette but did not match Richard's DNA. As the investigation progressed, police discovered that Richard had been having an affair with Catherine Sawyer, a colleague at Williamsport Hospital, which contributed to his separation from Miriam. His relationship with Miriam had begun similarly. He worked with her, they formed a bond, and eventually got married. A similar pattern occurred with Catherine. She worked with Richard, leading to their affair. This information led investigators to consider a possible love triangle. Catherine might have had a motive to kill Miriam in order to eliminate any chance of Richard reconciling with his wife. Jealousy can often drive people to commit terrible acts, but there were additional factors at play. In the event of a divorce, Richard and Miriam would need to divide their assets and finances. Furthermore, if they divorce, Richie is likely to stay with Miriam, which would require Richard to pay child support. Therefore, Miriam's death could be advantageous for both Richard and Catherine. Detectives aimed to determine Catherine's whereabouts at the time of Miriam's death. If Richard had left town to visit family, it would have given Catherine the opportunity to commit the murder. However, investigators confirmed that Catherine was out of town visiting relatives and could not have been involved in the crime. This left the police without any other suspects, as both Richard and Catherine had alibis. Then, an unexpected development emerged when a person claiming to be the murderer contacted the detectives by sending letters to the police station. The first anonymous letter stated that the writer was responsible for Miriam's murder. Detectives were perplexed, as this was an unusual occurrence. Initially, they suspected it might be a prank, possibly from teenagers or someone loosely connected to the case. The writer referred to himself as a soldier of God and a soldier of death, claiming that Miriam was a bad and immoral person. The letter was both confusing and unsettling. Despite attempts to make contact, the writer took great care to hide his identity. The letters were examined for fingerprints, but none were found. They were handwritten in block letters with a pencil, making it difficult for police to analyze the handwriting. While investigators were trying to make sense of the first letter, a second letter arrived, written in a different style and showing signs of arrogance and intellectual superiority. This new letter pointed to a potential suspect, as the author mentioned having multiple academic degrees, suggesting that the crime could have been committed by someone connected to Richard's professional circle. Investigators identified Dr. Ench Zama, Richard's close friend, as the most likely suspect. Zama was described as a tall man, likely with large feet, possibly in size 14. He became a key focus for investigators regarding the anonymous letters. During questioning, he examined both letters and suggested that someone might be trying to frame him. He denied any involvement in Miriam's death and claimed he was with friends at the time of the crime. The investigators verified his alibi and confirmed that he could not have attacked Miriam. The anonymous letters were also analyzed for DNA, revealing a black hair on the sealed flap of one envelope. The DNA did not match Sama or any other samples from the crime scene. This led investigators to suspect that someone was deliberately trying to mislead them. It seemed the letter writer had taken great care to hide their identity, but did they accidentally leave behind a hair? Investigators theorized that the hair was intentionally included to confuse them, as it belonged to someone unrelated to the case. They began to suspect that false evidence had been planted. The silencer with DNA, the cigarette butt, and the letters all suggested a deliberate effort to mislead the investigation. Investigators ended up with 4 DNA samples, each belonging to different individuals. The perpetrator had cleverly planted false evidence, hoping to mislead the police and hinder the investigation. However, investigators received the crucial information they had been waiting for since the first day of the investigation, when Miriam's body was discovered. Near her body, they found a phone receiver. Upon reviewing the phone records, they learned that Miriam had been on a call with a friend throughout the evening. When detectives met with this friend, she recounted that during their conversation, she heard glass breaking and then heard Miriam exclaim, "Oh my God." After that, she heard nothing more and hung up. When she called back, she received a busy signal, leading her to assume that the call had been disconnected and that Miriam was talking to someone else. This piece of information provided detectives with the key detail they had been missing. The call ended at 10:37 p.m., which corresponded exactly with the time of Miriam's death. This was significant for the investigation. With the established time of death, detectives revisited the alibis of all potential suspects. Richard's alibi appeared less credible. Initially, he claimed to have been in the Williamsport area and said he was heading south on Highway 15 by 10 p.m. He mentioned stopping for a meal at a restaurant, and if he had truly been at the restaurant at that time, he would not have been able to commit the crime. However, investigators could not verify his presence there at that time, which weakened his alibi. Then, at 11:24 p.m., Richard called his sister to inform her that he and Richie would need to stay at a hotel. This call became crucial for the investigation. Detectives began to trace Richard's cell phone location at the time of the call, which altered the direction of the investigation. The cell phone company provided coverage maps, allowing police to estimate where Richard made the call. They found that Richard had enough time to commit the crime and reach the hotel, where he checked in at 12:57 a.m. Detectives retraced the route from Miriam's home to the hotel, confirming that Richard could have committed the crime by 10:37 p.m. and still arrived in Harrisburg on time. The distance between the crime scene and the hotel was approximately 100 miles, and despite poor weather conditions, investigators made the trip within the required time frame. Now, Richard was the only suspect without an alibi. While this did not make him guilty, it did raise suspicions. The police needed concrete evidence to link him to the crime. They caught a break when 2 men walking in the woods found a modified rifle. Finding it unusual, they called the police. The rifle had a shortened barrel, a stock, and an optical sight, but the bolt was missing, and its serial numbers had been erased. It was identified as a rifle that matched the bullet that killed Miriam, and it was found near the road Richard drove on the night of the murder. Experts examined the suppressor found at the crime scene to see if it fit the rifle. They discovered that a screw had been added to the barrel, allowing the suppressor to attach perfectly. The challenge now was to link this weapon to Richard. The rifle was a Savage .23D Hornet, and police learned that Richard had inherited weapons from his father, with only his Aunt Jean being aware of this. A detective spoke with Richard's Aunt, Jean, who showed him a photo album. In a black and white photo, she revealed her brother, aka Richard's father, posing with a Savage .23D rifle. Too many coincidences pointed to Richard as a possible perpetrator. He had inherited the rifle along with other guns, but the Savage rifle was missing from his collection. Investigators needed more evidence for a conviction. They found several DNA samples at the scene that did not match Richard's. When the snow melted, they returned to the area where the rifle was found and conducted a detailed search. They discovered a pair of athletic shoes that matched the size and tread pattern of the footprints at the crime scene, indicating that the prints could have been left by the same shoes. The coincidence of the sneakers and rifle found in the woods being linked to the crime was highly unlikely. Experts needed to establish that the shoes belonged to Richard, but the sneakers were size 14, whereas Richard wore size 10. It was possible that he deliberately wore shoes that were not his size to confuse the police. The shoes were sent for forensic analysis. A hair was found on one of the sneakers, and DNA testing revealed that it did not match Richard's. This was another setback for the investigators, but they remained determined. They theorized that Richard had given his son, Richie, sleeping pills to keep him asleep in the car. A further hair test was conducted, this time looking for a match to Richie's DNA instead of Richard's. They found a match based on mitochondrial DNA. Richard had tried to use false DNA to mislead the police, but in the end, his son's DNA linked him to the murder. Investigators believe that Richie's hair accidentally made its way into the sneaker, possibly transferred from another surface when Richard changed shoes. In December 2002, 3 years after Miriam's death, Richard was unexpectedly arrested. He had been clever in planning the crime. He created an alibi, constructed a silencer, and intentionally wore the wrong shoe size. However, he left DNA evidence on the silencer and a cigarette butt. To mislead the investigation, he even mailed a hair to the police, but all the DNA samples turned out to belong to other individuals. Richard destroyed the serial numbers on the rifle to hide his tracks, but it appeared he rushed his alibi since he didn't properly conceal the rifle and boots. Richard had meticulously prepared for this crime, modifying the rifle and making a suppressor, which required considerable time and effort. He chose a weekend for the crime when his son, Richie, was staying with him to prevent his son from witnessing any violence. The plan began on Friday around 5 p.m. when he picked up Richie from Miriam's home. He returned a few hours later, parking approximately half a mile away from her house, and gave his son a sleeping pill to ensure he would sleep through the events that were about to unfold. Richard then walked to a spot by a tree along the creek bed, waiting for the right moment when Miriam was near the kitchen window. He couldn't shoot from any other angle, so he patiently waited for hours. At 10:37 p.m., while she was on the phone with a friend, he took his shot. He left behind evidence, a cigarette butt, intentionally placed where it could be discovered. He then fled the scene, leaving size 14 shoe prints, returned to his car, and drove south. He found a secluded area to dispose of his evidence, getting rid of the rifle and sneakers before heading back. At 11:24 p.m., he called his sister, hoping the phone records would support his alibi. However, they actually indicated that he had sufficient time to commit the murder. Though Richard did not admit to the crime, the jury reached a different conclusion and convicted him. In 2004, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Miriam's family issued a statement describing the situation as tragic, expressing that they felt there were no winners, but they were relieved to finally have closure and justice. Richard attempted to appeal the court's decision, but his efforts were unsuccessful. Lauren and William Heaven adopted a newborn baby girl named Erin in the summer of 1994. From the start, Erin became a cherished member of the family, receiving the same love and care as their biological children. Over the years, she forged a strong bond with her foster sisters, creating a close-knit family that offered mutual support and encouragement. The Heaven family felt that Erin had something special and knew she was meant to be a part of their family. Growing up, Erin was shy and reserved, often struggling to connect with others. However, she found comfort in her passion for horses. From a young age, Erin developed a natural affinity for animals, and riding allowed her to express her true self. The East Tennessee Riding Club became a refuge for her, a place to escape life's pressures. At the riding club, Erin discovered a sense of belonging and friendship. The horses created a supportive environment where she could explore her feelings and build her inner strength. She spent countless hours in the stables, grooming and riding, finding peace in the equestrian lifestyle. Lauren had strict rules for her daughters, especially regarding dating. When Erin met Jonathan Corwin, she realized he was someone special, kind, respectful, and genuinely interested in her. Knowing her parents' strict guidelines, Erin hesitated to introduce Jonathan to the family. After careful thought, she decided to share her parents' expectations with him, knowing that their approval would be necessary if they were to pursue a relationship. Jonathan respected the importance of Erin's family values and took the initiative to ask Lauren and William for permission to date her. They were pleasantly surprised by his approach, appreciating his willingness to honor their expectations and recognize the significance of family. Over time, he became an important part of their lives, respecting their traditions and supporting them during tough times. He swiftly gained their trust and affection. As his relationship with Erin deepened, they officially became a couple, and it felt like he was more than just her boyfriend. He was now part of the family. Jonathan blended in well with the Heaven sisters, spending quality time with them and creating lasting memories. After graduating high school, he chose to enlist in the Marines out of a strong sense of duty. On Erin's 18th birthday, he surprised her with a proposal. Nervous but excited, he knelt down and posed the question he had been eager to ask. Erin's face lit up with joy as she eagerly exclaimed, "Yes." Lauren and William were thrilled for their daughter, confident in the strength of her relationship with Jonathan and believing he was the right choice for her. However, they were also aware of the sacrifices and challenges that come with being a military spouse. They worried about their daughter, knowing there would be times when she would be away from her family and that they would miss her deeply. Erin and Jonathan got married in Las Vegas after the Marine Corps Ball. After Jonathan finished basic training, he was stationed at the 29 Palms Marine Base in California. In 2013, while there, Erin and Jonathan learned they were expecting their first child. Sadly, just a few months later, they lost the baby. The news was devastating for both of them, particularly for Erin. During this difficult time, Jonathan did his best to support and comfort her. 4 months later, Erin took a pregnancy test and was overjoyed to find out it was positive. Eager to share the news, she decided to wait for her mother Lauren's visit to California in June, believing it would be more special to see her reaction in person. Along with announcing her pregnancy, Erin and Lauren planned to visit attractions in San Diego, such as SeaWorld and the zoo, looking forward to spending quality time together. They also intended to explore hiking trails in Joshua Tree National Park during Lauren's visit. Erin planned to go to the park on June 28th. Before leaving, she said goodbye to Jonathan, telling him that she loved him. Jonathan expected Erin to return by late afternoon, but as the hours passed without her home, he grew worried. He called her more than 50 times, but there was no response. The next morning, June 29th, Jonathan reached out to Lauren in Tennessee, explaining that Erin hadn't come home the previous day. Lauren was immediately concerned, especially given Erin's pregnancy and the heat. Lauren feared that Erin might be lost in the park and was worried about how much water she had with her. Jonathan then contacted the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department to report his wife as missing, providing details about Erin's last known location and asking for help in finding her. The detective assigned to the case considered the possibility that Erin had driven to Tennessee to see her mother, Lauren, but Lauren firmly rejected this idea, noting that Erin disliked driving and had a poor sense of direction. To search for Erin, Jonathan and his Marine friends went to Joshua Tree National Park, a vast 800,000-acre area of rugged desert terrain. This challenging environment, combined with the intense heat of late June, made the search even harder. As the detective looked into Erin's disappearance, he began to explore the state of Erin and Jonathan's marriage. Although they seemed like an ideal couple, he quickly found that things were not as they appeared. In reality, their marriage had been under strain since the loss of their baby. Erin's mental health had suffered greatly, leading her into a deep depression that impacted every aspect of her life, including her relationship with Jonathan. The investigation also revealed that they were dealing with financial difficulties. They were burdened by debt, which added to the tension in their marriage. Throughout the investigation, the detective discovered that Erin had formed a close friendship with Christopher and Nicole Lee. Christopher, like Jonathan, was a Marine, which created an initial bond. Additionally, Erin and Nicole shared a love for horses, bringing them even closer together. Nicole introduced Aaron to White Rock Horse Rescue Ranch, about 45 minutes from their military base in 29 Palms. This ranch offered Aaron a chance to escape her problems and find peace in a serene environment. As Aaron's relationship with Jonathan worsened, she became increasingly attached to Christopher. The detective revealed that Christopher, having recently returned from Afghanistan, also faced personal struggles. Their shared experiences and emotional connections through their love of horses created a strong bond. Aaron's affection for Christopher's 6-year-old daughter, Liberty, further deepened their relationship. She often babysat Liberty, providing a nurturing atmosphere that strengthened her ties to Christopher and her family. Aaron and Christopher spent hours working together at the horse ranch, and initially, it seemed innocent. However, over time, they developed a romantic connection, which caught the attention of Nicole, Christopher's wife. She informed Jonathan, Aaron's husband, that she suspected an affair between Aaron and Christopher. Jonathan was devastated to hear that Aaron had been unfaithful. Despite this betrayal, he loved Aaron deeply and wanted to work on their marriage. Consequently, Aaron ended her relationship with Christopher and reconciled with Jonathan. However, a deeper investigation into Aaron's disappearance revealed a different story. Detectives found evidence that Aaron and Christopher were still involved romantically. This information came from Aaron's close friend, Jessica, who mentioned that on the day Aaron vanished, she had excitedly talked about a special trip with Christopher. Aaron hinted to Jessica that Christopher might propose, despite being married to Jonathan and pregnant with his child. The most shocking detail was when Jessica revealed that Aaron had doubts about who the biological father of her unborn baby was. This revelation broke Jonathan's heart, especially when detectives informed him that Aaron had planned to meet Christopher on the day she disappeared. The news left Jonathan feeling sad and anxious, as he was now considered a potential suspect in her disappearance. He firmly denied any involvement, maintaining his innocence. On June 28, the day Aaron went missing, a woman driving near the entrance to Joshua Tree Park noticed a car parked by the roadside. As she drove past, she saw that the car was still there. Suspicious, she took several photos of the vehicle to document potential evidence. 2 days later, on June 30th, another individual who also noticed the car parked there reported it to the police. When officers arrived, they found that the car was registered to Aaron. The woman who took photos of the car became an important witness in the case. She shared the images with detectives, hoping they could aid the investigation. The detectives focused on the location where Aaron's car was parked at the entrance to Joshua Tree Park. While examining the area, they found a set of shoe prints that formed the loop from the driver's side door to some visible tire tracks. This led them to believe that Aaron had parked her car and then got into another vehicle before she disappeared. Christopher, a person of interest, initially claimed he didn't know Aaron well. However, detectives were aware of their extramarital affair. When confronted about his statements, Christopher said he didn't see it as necessary to share details with the police, thinking it wasn't relevant. Eventually, he admitted to having a romantic relationship with Aaron. Despite his claims, the detectives were skeptical and informed him they had evidence showing Aaron went to Joshua Tree National Park to meet him on the day she disappeared. Christopher acknowledged that they had talked about running away together but insisted he was never serious, citing his love for his 6-year-old daughter, Liberty, and stating that he would never abandon her. Christopher initially denied inviting Aaron to the park with him, claiming that she had only overheard him discussing plans to visit the area. He tried to suggest that she had asked to go along. With no solid evidence against him, detectives bluffingly told him that the tire tracks found at the park matched his vehicle, suggesting he had met Aaron there. This made Christopher nervous, and he confessed that he might have entered the area where Aaron had parked her car, but he claimed he never saw her on the day she vanished. The detectives shifted their attention to the White Rock Horse Rescue Ranch, where Aaron often volunteered to care for horses. They interviewed the ranch owner, who revealed that on the day Aaron disappeared, Christopher's wife, Nicole, had sent a text stating that Christopher wouldn't be at work because he was sick. The following morning, when Christopher and Nicole returned to the ranch, they appeared tense as news of Aaron's disappearance spread. The owner also mentioned that Nicole believed Aaron was pretending to be missing to gain attention. During the investigation, detectives learned that Christopher and his family were planning to move back to Alaska soon, as he was nearing the end of his military service. The ranch owner had allowed Christopher and Nicole to borrow her SUV for transporting their belongings and permitted the detectives to search the vehicle. Inside the SUV, investigators found a potato launcher, which is considered an illegal weapon in California. This discovery led to Christopher's arrest, although he was released on bail on July 5, 2014. A week later, he was discharged from the Marines. Meanwhile, the search for Aaron continued in San Bernardino County. Aaron's husband, Jonathan, passed a polygraph test, indicating he was truthful and not a suspect. At this stage of the investigation, detectives believed that Christopher had lured Aaron to Joshua Tree National Park, where he killed her and disposed of her body in one of the shafts. A breakthrough came when a friend who had accompanied Christopher on a scouting trip provided detectives with photographs from their outing. Using these photos, detectives engaged a cave expert to pinpoint where they were taken in the Mojave Desert. The expert identified the location as the Rose Peru mine. However, since there are multiple mines in the area, Aaron's remains could be in any of them. Determined to find Aaron, a large-scale search of the Rose Peru mine commenced, lasting several weeks as detectives meticulously searched the desert for clues. Despite their extensive efforts, the search did not yield any positive results. Throughout this process, the detectives remained hopeful for closure and justice for Aaron. On August 14, 2014, while searching for a missing woman, a member of the San Bernardino Cave Rescue Team noticed a strong smell of gas coming from a mine. The team quickly sent someone down the mine shaft to investigate. Inside, they found a human leg, prompting them to swiftly recover the body. Along with the body, they collected several pieces of evidence, including a makeshift torch made from a skirt, a propane tank, and a bottle of Sprite, which were important for the investigation. The body was then taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. The examination revealed that the remains were those of Erin Corwin. Further investigation showed that she had a garrote wire around her neck, indicating she had been strangled. A garrote is designed to restrict airflow by putting pressure on the throat or windpipe and usually consists of a handle and a flexible wire. Based on the evidence found at the scene, an arrest warrant was issued for Christopher Lee, charging him with first-degree murder in connection with Aaron's disappearance and death. During the trial, multiple witnesses testified that Christopher had expressed interest in how to dispose of a body in the weeks before Aaron went missing. Their testimonies bolstered the prosecution's case against him. One of his friends recalled seeing a white propane tank in his car that was similar to the one found with Aaron's body. When asked about the propane tank, he allegedly stated that he planned to blow up a mine. A close friend of Aaron testified that Aaron was in love with Christopher and intended to leave her husband, Jonathan, for him. On the day Aaron disappeared, she was excited about a special trip to Joshua Tree National Park with Christopher. During Christopher's trial, a DNA expert from the crime lab testified about evidence found at the scene. The expert revealed that the green t-shirt, which was used to make a homemade torch found near Aaron's body in the mine, had Christopher's DNA on it. Additionally, DNA from both Aaron and Christopher was found on a swab taken from the mouth of a Sprite bottle discovered beside Aaron's body. The prosecution's theory in Aaron's murder case was that Christopher took her to Joshua Tree National Park under the pretense of a romantic getaway but with harmful intentions. They claimed that Christopher met Aaron at the park entrance and convinced her to get into his car. Instead of driving her to scenic spots or hiking trails, he allegedly took her to the Rose Peru mine. There, he is accused of strangling her with a garrote and then disposing of her body in the mine shaft. To eliminate any evidence linking him to the crime, he attempted to blow up the mine using a homemade torch made from his t-shirt and a propane tank. His goal was to destroy Aaron's body and any evidence against him. However, for unknown reasons, he ultimately did not carry out the explosion. Christopher testified in his own defense, explaining to the jury that he had always intended to leave the United States Marine Corps by June 2014 to start a new chapter in his life. He also mentioned that he planned to break up with Aaron and move to Alaska with his wife and daughter. On June 28, He had organized a hunting trip with Aaron, hoping it would provide an opportunity for an open conversation. Christopher picked Aaron up at the entrance of the park and drove her to the Rose Peru mine, a remote area known for its beauty. However, Aaron expressed concerns about the location's safety and decided to stay in the car while Christopher unloaded his supplies. Once back at the car, where Aaron was listening to music, they began to talk. Christopher told Aaron about his plans to relocate to Alaska, and she expressed a desire to join him, emphasizing her wish to be part of his daughter's life. However, Christopher held a troubling perspective. He believed that his wife, Nicole, had discovered their daughter was being abused and that Aaron was responsible. While sitting in the car near the mine, he confronted Aaron about whether she had touched his daughter inappropriately. Aaron became visibly nervous and, while stuttering, admitted to the abuse, which deeply upset Christopher and made him determined to protect his daughter. Christopher admitted to the jury that learning of the abuse filled him with anger towards Aaron. Concerned for his daughter's safety, he left the truck to retrieve his garrote, intending to punish Aaron for her actions. He then strangled her to death and dragged her body into the mine shaft to ensure she would not be found. Christopher Lee was found guilty of Aaron Corwin's murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Aaron's husband, Jonathan Corwin, strongly denies Christopher's claim that Aaron abused Christopher and Nicole's daughter. The detectives and prosecutor involved in the case have expressed their disbelief and disgust at these allegations, asserting that anyone who knew Aaron would understand she was incapable of harming that child. On the evening of May 28, 2023, 29-year-old Julia Tramontano vanished without a trace. 7 months pregnant, she stopped responding to calls and messages from loved ones. The first person to report her disappearance was the man she lived with, Alexander Impagnatiello. He insisted that when he returned home from work, he found the apartment empty and had no idea where his partner could have gone. From the very beginning, there were too many unusual details in this case. Julia had left behind most of her personal belongings, and her plans for the near future gave no indication that she intended to disappear. As investigators began piecing together her last known activities, they uncovered even more troubling facts. The night before she went missing, Julia had sent messages to her mother, Loredana Femiano, and a close friend, revealing that she had had a serious argument with Alexander. She was deeply upset and wrote that the situation was causing her a great deal of distress. But the most important question remained unanswered: what really happened that fateful evening? If Julia had truly left the house on her own, why had no one seen her since? In the days that followed, investigators would begin unraveling a web of deception that would lead to a grim truth. Julia was born on May 2, 1994, in a small town in the province of Naples. She grew up in a close-knit family where support and warmth were always present. Her parents encouraged independence and self-confidence from an early age. While they embraced modern views, family traditions remained a cornerstone of their lives, and home was always a place she could return to for guidance, comfort. Julia attended a local school, excelling in the humanities. She was drawn to real estate, fascinated by architecture, investment opportunities, and the idea of becoming a successful real estate agent. After high school, she pursued a degree in the field, quickly mastering the profession thanks to her analytical mindset and strong communication skills. By the age of 25, she had built a solid reputation in the industry, but for Julia, this wasn't enough. She dreamed of life in a big city filled with opportunities. By the time she turned 26, her career in her hometown had reached a plateau. Working at a real estate agency, she realized the local market had its limitations. Inspired by her friends' stories, she decided to move to Senego, a suburb of Milan, where she believed would offer her a new chapter filled with potential. By the end of 2018, her decision was final. Senego symbolized independence, new connections, and the career growth she longed for. The transition happened quickly. Packing her belongings and saying goodbye to her loved ones, she set off for the city that she hoped would become her new home. After moving to Senego, Julia immediately immersed herself in work. The city's real estate market was fast-paced, competitive, required confidence and persistence. She adapted quickly, building connections, attending networking events, and closing deals. Her new life was exciting, but amid her busy schedule, she found herself longing for something more, personal happiness. It was during this time that she met Alexander. Their paths crossed at a Milan bar where her colleagues had invited her to celebrate a successful deal. Alexander worked as a bartender at a high-end lounge inside a five-star hotel. A year older than Julia, he was charming, outgoing, and had a natural ability to connect with people. His confidence and charisma drew her in. With him, she felt like she could relax, momentarily escape the pressures of work, and simply enjoy the present. The first few weeks of their relationship felt effortless. They spent evenings dining at restaurants, strolling through the city at night, and talking about the future. Alexander shared that he had a son from a previous relationship but assured her that his past was behind him and that he was now looking for stability. Julia sincerely hoped that her move to Senegal would bring not only career growth but also personal fulfillment. She was convinced that Alexander was the person she was meant to build a future with. Julia believed she had finally met someone with whom she could build a lasting relationship. Their romance moved quickly, and within a few months, they decided to move in together. She had no idea what secrets he was hiding or how much her decision would change the course of her life. Tensions in Julia's relationship with Alexander were growing. She felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint the issue. As time went on, the discomfort increased, while Alexander continued to act as if everything was normal. By the end of 2022, Julia noticed changes in her body, constant fatigue, strange cravings, and a missed period led her to suspect that something was different. Not wanting to wait any longer, she bought a pregnancy test. She then realized she was pregnant. This news brought mixed feelings. She had always wanted a family, but the past few months with Alexander had been challenging. Nonetheless, she knew she needed to tell him in person. Nervously, Julia chose the right moment to share the news. She had thought about various possible reactions: surprise, joy, maybe even fear, but Alexander's expression was unreadable. After a few seconds of silence, he finally asked one question: "Are you sure?" Julia felt the chilling distance in his demeanor. He showed no curiosity and asked no questions about how far along she was or how she was feeling. His indifference was impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, he never brought up the topic again. No discussions about the future, no interest in upcoming doctor's visits. Julia felt abandoned but held on to hope that in time he would come to terms with the situation. The new year began, but Alexander's attitude remained unchanged. More and more, Julia found herself spending evenings alone, contemplating her future. She kept working, trying to focus on other things, but an uneasy feeling grew inside her. Meanwhile, Alexander's double life took an unexpected turn. In early 2023, he learned that his other partner, Allegra Syria, was also expecting. The news caught him completely off guard. Just like Julia, Allegra had no idea that another woman was in her life. She truly believed she and Alexander were in a committed relationship. Unlike Julia, however, Allegra was unsure whether she wanted to continue the pregnancy. Alexander convinced Allegra that having a child wasn't the right decision at that moment. He assured her that he would support whatever choice she made, but strongly implied that ending the pregnancy would be for the best. Allegra hesitated for a long time but eventually agreed. Alexander accompanied her to the medical procedure, ensuring that this chapter was closed. He hoped that with Allegra's pregnancy no longer an issue, he could now focus on dealing with what he saw as his bigger problem: Julia's decision to have the baby. Unlike Allegra, Julia was determined to continue her pregnancy. Despite his emotional distance, Alexander repeatedly tried to persuade her to reconsider, but Julia refused to change her mind. For her, this was a conscious and personal decision. She knew that her relationship with Alexander was falling apart, but she was prepared to raise the baby on her own. What she didn't realize was that this choice would become a turning point in her life. After Julia refused to terminate the pregnancy, Alexander realized he was losing control of the situation. Her firm decision disrupted his plans and forced him to look for another way to free himself from what he saw as a problem. He had begun systematically researching poisons. He scoured the internet for methods to cause harm without raising suspicion, analyzing which substances were both effective and difficult to detect. His research covered chemical compounds found in household products, plant-based toxins, and even highly dangerous substances like cyanide. However, most of the options he found were either too difficult to obtain or left clear traces in the body. Eventually, he settled on rodenticides, products designed to eliminate rodents. These were widely available over the counter and wouldn't raise any red flags. He also found information suggesting that certain types worked slowly, causing internal bleeding, weakness, and anemia symptoms that could easily be mistaken for pregnancy complications. After, Alexander began putting his plan into action. He started adding small amounts of the toxic substance to Julia's food and drinks, hoping that her health would gradually decline. Within weeks, she began experiencing unusual symptoms: constant exhaustion, dizziness, nausea, and sharp abdominal pain. Julia confided in her friends about how unwell she felt but assumed it was just part of the pregnancy. She had no idea that something much more sinister was happening. Alexander closely monitored her condition, expecting the effects to intensify, but the poison wasn't working as quickly as he had hoped. Frustrated, he continued to try increasing its dosage, but the results were still disappointing. Julia still felt sick, but her body was fighting back, and the pregnancy was progressing. This infuriated Alexander. His original plan had failed, and now he was forced to consider another way out. Alexander was accustomed to being in control of situations. He skillfully crafted his lies, knowing exactly what to say to persuade each woman to accept his version of reality. Julia thought he was merely going through a tough time and believed he would eventually come to terms with the pregnancy. Allegra, meanwhile, was convinced that his past relationship had ended long ago. But one misstep shattered his carefully maintained facade. The first sign of trouble for Allegra was how uncomfortable Alexander became whenever his past was mentioned. He avoided talking about his life before they met, never shared his social media accounts, and didn't mention his ex. Initially, this didn't seem suspicious, but over time, the inconsistencies began to accumulate. The turning point occurred when she accidentally discovered recent photos on his phone, images of him with Julia. Their expressions and body language indicated that their relationship was still very much alive. Allegra didn't want to leap to conclusions, so she started observing him more closely and taking mental notes. He frequently left in the evenings, saying he was working late, but his co-workers at the hotel disclosed that he had actually clocked out early. At times, he wouldn't answer his phone, only to later offer excuses that didn't quite make sense. When Allegra confronted Alexander about the photos, he responded immediately. He accused Julia of being unable to accept their breakup and spreading the pictures to make him feel guilty. Allegra wanted to trust his explanation, but it felt off to her. As she asked more questions, Alexander's answers became less convincing. Realizing he was losing control, he quickly changed his story. He claimed that Julia not only refused to move on but had also faked her pregnancy to try to keep him. In a last-ditch effort to support his lie, Alexander even created a fake DNA test. He modified a file he found online and presented it as evidence that he was not the child's father. Although Allegra initially believed him, her doubts persisted. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she knew. A few days later, Allegra decided to investigate for herself. While Alexander was sleeping, she took his phone, found Julia's number, and sent her a message. Julia replied almost immediately, and her tone wasn't one of revenge. Rather, she was also seeking answers. The next day, Allegra proposed they meet in person. Both women realized that this conversation had the potential to change everything. On May 27, 2023, they agreed to meet at Armani Hotel where Allegra worked, feeling a mix of tension and determination. Allegra was still unaware of the full extent of Alexander's betrayal, while Julia was shocked to learn that the man she had envisioned a future with was living a double life. Their meeting began cautiously. Allegra spoke first, revealing what she had uncovered. She explained how Alexander had convinced her that his past relationship was completely over, and she mentioned the supposed DNA test that indicated the baby wasn't his. Julia listened intently. Once Allegra finished, Julia calmly clarified that the test was fake. She had never asked for a test, and the timeline of her pregnancy corresponded perfectly with their relationship. More importantly, she disclosed that she and Alexander were still living together, and he had never given her any indication that their relationship was ending. As the minutes passed, Allegra began to see the reality of the situation. She realized she had been deceived from the beginning. Her entire view of their relationship changed, and for the first time, she felt certain about the truth. Although she was hurt and disappointed, she held no resentment toward Julia. It became painfully clear that both women had fallen victim to the same web of lies. Their conversation lasted more than an hour as them shared details, gradually uncovering the full extent of Alexander's deceit. Eventually, they moved from seeing each other as rivals to feeling connected. In that moment, Julia made a decisive choice. She was finished with Alexander. Her future was for herself and her child. Alexander had no role in it now. Upon returning home, Julia confronted Alexander right away, revealing that she knew everything and that their relationship was over. He initially denied everything and then became defensive, accusing her of intruding into his private matters. However, Julia disregarded his excuses, firmly stated that she was leaving for Naples and didn't want any further contact with him. That evening, she texted her mother and sister to explain her decision. They fully supported her and offered assistance in any way they could. Julia reassured them, saying she needed to handle a few things in Milan first but would be home in a few days. After their conversation, Alexander realized he had lost control. Everything he had concealed was now revealed. Julia knew the truth about his double life, his lies, and his manipulation. She no longer trusted him or listened to his words. She had made a firm decision to leave him. That day, the tension between them reached. Julia ignored all of Alexander's attempts to engage her. She focused solely on packing her belongings, showing no emotion. Her silence only intensified his frustration. Alexander pleaded with her, insisting she was making a mistake, declaring his love, and urging her to reconsider, but Julia remained silent. His anger escalated as he raised his voice in desperation, seeking any reaction from her. When he realized she had made up her mind, a wave of uncontrollable rage consumed him. In a moment of blind fury, he grabbed a knife from the counter and attacked. Julia had no opportunity to defend herself. The assault was swift and precise. But for Alexander, it was not enough to stop there. Driven by panic and fear of being exposed, he continued his assault, losing all sense of restraint. Realizing he needed to eliminate the evidence, he dragged her to the bathroom. He poured alcohol over her and set her on fire, hoping the flames would destroy any evidence. However, the fire only caused burns and did not fully consume. Frantically, he grabbed rags, cleaning supplies, scrubbing the blood from the floor, walls, and furniture. Despite his efforts, the stains persisted. The apartment still resembled a crime scene. He understood that he couldn't completely erase what had happened, but he believed he could find a way to avoid being held responsible. Having failed to destroy the evidence through fire, he needed a new strategy. His first step was to stage her disappearance, making it seem like Julia had left on her own. He took her phone, began messaging her family and friends. Knowing they would be concerned if she suddenly went missing, he crafted messages to imply she had chosen to leave. He sent a brief, vague text to her mother, stating that she needed some time alone. Then, he messaged one of her friends, claiming that she had left but wasn't ready to discuss her whereabouts. He intended to buy himself some time to make it appear that Julia had simply vanished. However, his plan didn't stop there. He was aware that someone would eventually alert the authorities, so, on May 28, 2023, he went to the police and reported Julia missing. He claimed that they had an argument and she left the house, never to return. His story was straightforward. That morning he had gone to work, and when he came back, she was gone. He's saying that her personal belongings, including her passport and money, were missing, implying she had left town voluntarily. Investigators paid close attention, but right from the beginning, something felt off. His behavior raised suspicion. He spoke too confidently, almost as if he already knew what questions the officers would ask. In contrast to Julia's family and friends, who were frantic, desperate for information, he remained unsettlingly calm. While the police organized a search, Alexander concentrated on concealing the evidence. He wrapped the body in a plastic bag and moved them to the garage. Over the next few days, he relocated the body several times, first hiding them in the basement of their building, then bringing them back to the garage. He was trying to find a way to get rid of them for good, but the longer he waited, the more mistakes he made. Investigators started examining his statements closely, interviewing neighbors, and searching for inconsistencies. He thought he was still in control, but law enforcement was closing in. After Alexander reported Julia missing, the police followed their standard procedures for such cases. The first significant clue came when forensic specialists found traces of blood in his car. Despite his attempts to clean it, modern technology allowed investigators to identify the biological evidence, which was confirmed to belong to Julia. The second piece of evidence was uncovered in the common areas of their apartment building. Faint reddish stains on the stairs and in the hallway initially appeared to be dust or spilled liquid. However, chemical testing revealed they were traces of partially cleaned blood. Investigators noted Alexander's strange behavior. Unlike most people whose loved ones disappear, he showed little genuine concern. He did not reach out to Julia's family for help in finding her, nor did he actively participate in spreading information about her disappearance. He only completed the formal steps to report her missing, which raised further suspicions. A major breakthrough in the case occurred when detectives analyzed his electronic devices. They confiscated his phone, computer, and tablet, revealing alarming findings. First, they discovered a search history that dated back several months before the crime. He had been researching poisons, learning about the effects of various toxins, and reading articles on how to discreetly harm someone. Some searches even questioned why certain toxic substances might fail to work. Another crucial piece of evidence was the forged DNA test he had shown Algra. Forensic analysis confirmed that the document had been tampered with and that it was downloaded from a website that allowed users to edit medical records. As more evidence accumulated, Alexander's story began to unravel. Investigators increased their pressure, systematically highlighting inconsistencies in his account. Initially, he maintained his innocence, claiming he knew nothing about it. However, with each interrogation, the police presented undeniable facts. They showed him photographs of blood stains, confronted him with his search history. They brought in witnesses who reported hearing loud noises and shouting from Alexander's apartment. A significant breakthrough in the investigation happened when authorities examined Alexander's actions after Julia went missing. Surveillance cameras showed him making several trips to the garage, where he carried plastic bags inside and later came out empty-handed. Eventually, he confessed and revealed where he had hidden her body. On June 1, 2023, police found Julia's remains in a dense area near Sago. Forensic examination indicated that someone had tried to burn the body, but the attempt was not completed. Despite his efforts to conceal the truth, experts were able to determine how she died and gather conclusive evidence linking him to the crime. The tragic death of Giulia Tramontano shocked people all over Italy, a country where gender-based violence is a serious issue. After Alexander was arrested, protests began nationwide. Women filled the streets, carrying signs and demanding stricter punishments for domestic violence. Memorial marches took place in cities like Milan, Naples, and Rome, calling for systemic changes to better protect vulnerable individuals. At one rally, Giulia's sister, Chiara Tramontano, urged lawmakers to take action against the increasing number of cases where offenders face no significant consequences until it is too late. Forensic experts and investigators focused on understanding the psychological profile of Alexander. A psychological evaluation revealed troubling behavioral traits. Court-appointed psychiatrists determined that he exhibited strong narcissistic tendencies, showing no remorse for his actions. His behavior during interrogations and court appearances demonstrated a profound self-centeredness, an utter lack of empathy. He viewed others only in terms of how they could serve his interests, ignoring their feelings. His actions were motivated solely by a need to protect his reputation and keep control over those around him. Any perceived loss of power triggered a quick and dangerous reaction. During the trial, Alexander tried to appear remorseful, but neither Julia's family nor the public found his words convincing. He claimed to be baffled about how he could commit such a horrific act, asserting it was a moment of impulsive rage that he didn't fully recognize. However, prosecutors presented compelling evidence: his online searches for poisons, the attempted poisoning, the falsified DNA test, and the false report he filed with the police. Each piece of evidence demonstrated that the crime was premeditated. After Alexander's arrest, Algra decided to help the authorities. She provided them with her messages with him, revealing that he had lied to both her and Julia. During the trial, Algra also testified about the fake DNA test and his many attempts to manipulate her. As a witness, she was called by prosecutors to confirm important details, including how Alexander concealed his double life, lied about Julia's pregnancy, and made excuses when the truth began to emerge. She realized that if she hadn't stumbled upon those photos on his phone, the truth could have remained hidden for much longer. During her testimony, she expressed the guilt she felt toward Julia, even though she too had been a victim of his lies. After the trial, Algra chose not to speak to journalists, stayed out of the public eye, and tried to create some distance from the tragedy. Reports suggest that she later left Milan for another city, hoping to rebuild her life. The court found Alexander Impagnatiel guilty of first-degree murder, highlighting aggravating factors such as the cruelty of the crime, the ongoing emotional abuse inflicted on the victim, and his intentional efforts to destroy evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison. In the judge's closing remarks, it was stated that such crimes cannot be justified as mere lapses in control or temporary emotional turmoil. Alexander's actions over several months showed a clear and deliberate intention to eliminate Julia. Julia's case serves as a tragic reminder of the risks posed by individuals who view their partners as possessions. It raised awareness and contributed to a larger movement aimed at protecting those who are still in danger. Julia Tramontano's radiant spirit, marked by her ambition, warmth, and unwavering resolve, continues to resonate far beyond the tragedy that claimed her life. Her courage in the face of betrayal and her dreams for her unborn child remain a powerful testament to the strength of the human heart. Through the tireless advocacy of her mother, Loredana Femiano, and sister, Chiara Tramontano, Julia's legacy fuels a growing movement to combat gender-based violence, inspiring communities to stand united for justice and protection. In every heart she touched, Julia's light shines on, a beacon of hope and a call to build a world where no one suffers in silence. The aggressive behavior in teens isn't something they are born with or inherit. It's shaped by their surroundings, the way they are raised, and the quality of their relationships with adults. This doesn't apply to diagnosed mental health conditions, of course, but it's crucial to remember that every person, no matter their age, needs love, support, care, and understanding. Emotional and physical mistreatment can sometimes push someone to a very dark place, even turning them into someone capable of terrifying actions. At first glance, Hollowell family seemed like an average household. Their co-workers and neighbors couldn't say a bad word about them, but somehow, trouble seemed to follow them. Strange, sometimes downright disturbing things happened around this family. When the mother was found lifeless in their home, attention quickly turned to her sons. As detectives dug deeper into the case, they began to uncover a string of unsettling family secrets, the kind that painted a very different picture of the quiet, seemingly normal life the Hollowell family had appeared to lead. The Hollowell family lived in a small town in Citrus County, Central Florida. They owned a spacious lakefront home in the unincorporated community of Inverness, near a scenic lake. The area was surrounded by lush greenery, fostering a tight-knit, low-crime community where residents knew each other well. The property had been in the family since the mid-1950s, meaning 3 generations had lived under that same roof. It's worth noting that only about 15 homes sat along that lake, and the residents had lived side by side for many years. This created a tight-knit, close community where everyone knew each other well, crime was virtually non-existent, and strangers were a rare sight. The area was surrounded by lush greenery, making it feel almost like a hidden paradise. In 1965, after many years of unsuccessful attempts to become parents, the Hollowell couple made the decision to adopt a baby girl whose biological parents had given up their rights. She was just 3 months old when they brought her home and gave her the name Denise. From that moment on, she became the center of their universe. She was raised in an environment full of love and care, received a strong education. She had the freedom to pursue her biggest passion, extreme sports. At the age of 20, still a college student, Denise got married for the first time to a fellow student named Richard. The two shared a love for skydiving. In fact, on their wedding day, they did a group jump. During freefall, Denise and Richard exchanged rings midair, but the excitement of their adventurous lifestyle couldn't hold their relationship together. Like many young couples, they simply weren't ready for the realities of married life. They divorced 2 years after their wedding and eventually lost all contact with each other. In 1998, at age 33, Denise got married for the second time. This time her partner was Benjamin, who was nearly a decade older. They hoped to start a family, but Denise was diagnosed with health complications that made pregnancy impossible. Rather than give up on becoming parents, they took a less traditional route. In 2006, the then 41-year-old Denise and 51-year-old Benjamin adopted a boy named Carlos. He had just turned 4, was originally from Guatemala. A year later, they adopted another boy, Angel, from Honduras. This was another complicated, expensive process that demanded a lot from them, both emotionally and financially. Despite now having 2 sons, Denise and Benjamin's marriage continued to strain. In 2012, they made the decision to divorce. After the divorce, the boys remained with Denise, while Benjamin moved to another state. He never stayed in touch and showed no further interest in the boys' lives. By the time Denise's adoptive parents passed away, she inherited a lakefront home in Inverness, Citrus County, and moved there with her sons. She worked as a special education teacher in Marion County, a modest job that didn't bring in much money, but it seemed to be enough to get by. People who knew her described her as educated, intelligent, and non-confrontational. She was respected at work, and neighbors had nothing negative to say about her. Raising 2 adopted sons on her own is incredibly difficult for Denise. Without a father figure in the picture, Carlos and Angel began to spiral. Denise struggled to keep them in line. Angel, in particular, caused the most concern. Even in elementary school, he refused to follow rules or listen to authority. He often had outbursts and episodes of intense aggression. This wasn't typical mischief or rebellion. Angel would lash out at other students. His behavior was sometimes so extreme that it posed a real danger to both himself and others. Carlos had his own issues, though his behavior was less overt. He was more withdrawn and didn't pick fights openly, but if he sensed a confrontation coming, he wouldn't hesitate to throw the first punch. Carlos struggled to make connections with peers and had very few friends, but he found some solace in athletic activities. The brothers never got along. Despite growing up in the same home for years, they didn't bond. In fact, they were openly hostile toward each other. Their fights were brutal and frequent. It was clear they harbored deep resentment. Still, Denise didn't seem to view this as a serious problem. She never sought outside help or involved any professionals. By the time Angel was around 9 or 10 years old, things had taken a turn for the worse. He began skipping school regularly, and teachers reported repeated incidents of aggression. He also started stealing. Around the same time, he ran away from home for the first time, disappearing for several days before returning. After that, it became a pattern. He would vanish for days at a time and stopped attending school altogether. In September 2015, officials from Child Welfare Services paid a visit to the Hollowell residence following ongoing complaints from teachers about Angel's behavior and his repeated disappearances. Their goal was to check on the home environment and speak with the family directly, but what they found was unsettling. Denise was home with the boys and clearly wasn't expecting any visitors. Still, she allowed the officer and the child protection worker inside, as she had no legal reason to deny them. One of the first things that stood out was the condition of the windows. The lower floor windows were partially covered from the inside with cardboard, making it impossible to see what was going on inside from the outside. Inside the house where Denise lived with her two sons, something felt off from the very beginning. There were no signs of typical hobbies or pastimes one might expect. No toys, no bikes, no rollerblades. The place was almost barren, with only the most basic furniture, all of it left over from her late parents. The kitchen had an old refrigerator and an old washing machine. Denise had a bed in her own room, but her sons were sleeping on inflatable mattresses tossed directly onto the floor. The most shocking discovery, however, came when officials inspected Angel's room. It didn't resemble a typical bedroom at all. It looked more like solitary confinement. The heavy wooden door had not only a basic turn lock on the inside, but also a large metal bolt installed on the outside. There was a small hatch built into the door, which could be locked as well, apparently used to pass food and water inside without opening the door completely. The room was dimly lit. The windows had been fully covered with cardboard, blocking out all natural light. In one corner, Angel sat quietly on a worn-out mattress, and in the opposite corner stood a foul-smelling plastic bucket about 1/3 full of human waste. Angel, however, wasn't scared. He seemed angry. Denise and her two sons were immediately taken to the local police station. A child psychologist spoke with the boys while Denise was questioned about the disturbing situation at home. She explained that locking Angel in the room was something she did for safety reasons, to prevent the brothers from fighting and to keep the younger one from running away again. Her explanation didn't sit well with the officers, especially once Angel began to describe his side of the story. He claimed that Carlos frequently hit him, humiliated him, and even threatened to end his life. Denise, according to Angel, never stepped in or defended him. Feeling unsafe, he had tried running away several times. After each escape, Denise began locking him in the room, sometimes for days at a time. He said he had no access to a real bathroom and was given only a plastic bucket to relieve himself. Food and water were passed through the small window in the door, which otherwise stayed locked. Following this testimony, Denise was placed under arrest. Authorities decided to temporarily place both boys in protective care while searching for new adoptive families. A judge was expected to determine what would happen next. But then something unexpected happened. Carlos began defending his adoptive mother. According to Carlos, his younger brother posed a serious risk not only to himself but to everyone around him. No one seemed capable of managing Angel's behavior, and their mom was simply doing what she could to keep everyone safe. Carlos shared that at one point, Angel had brought a knife to school and came dangerously close to harming a classmate. Thankfully, no one was hurt. His account was later confirmed by school staff. Carlos continued to defend his adoptive mother, passionately insisting he wanted to go back home and live with her just like before. During every hearing, he stood by Denise and pleaded with the court not to strip her of her parental rights. Other witnesses, including relatives and neighbors, couldn't offer much insight. They all described the Hollowells as a decent family, considered Denise a caring and responsible mother. Eventually, the case seemed to lean in her favor. Denise didn't appear to be guilty of any wrongdoing. It looked more like she was simply overwhelmed and unable to cope with her younger son's deeply troubling behavior. Angel was eventually placed in a psychiatric facility, then transferred to a group home for high-risk youths, finally placed with a new adoptive family. Denise was cleared of all accusations and reinstated as Carlos's legal guardian. As he had hoped, Carlos returned to the lake house and resumed what seemed like a normal life. On the evening of July 13, 2019, around 6 p.m., a panicked teenager called Citrus County Emergency Services, reporting that his mother had been attacked. The 17-year-old was distraught, pleading for officers and paramedics to arrive quickly. Carlos waited for them at the end of the driveway. He led responders into his mother's bedroom, and what they saw was horrifying. Denise was lying on her side on the bed. Lodged in the back of her head was an axe. Blood had soaked through the pillow, creating a massive red stain. When the first responders arrived, she was still showing faint signs of life. However, despite their efforts, she passed away en route to the hospital. Carlos was the only witness to the incident and provided a story that raised questions. He claimed that earlier that day, he and his mom had attended a relative's funeral in a neighboring town, followed by a memorial meal. They returned home around 4:30 p.m., both exhausted, and decided to lie down for a rest. Carlos said he quickly fell asleep. About an hour later, around 6 p.m., he woke up to strange noises and the sound of the dogs barking. Looking out the window, he noticed that the gate to the dog run was open and that their dogs were running loose in the yard. Concerned, he went to check on his mom. That's when he discovered the horrifying scene. He immediately contacted emergency services, hoping she could still be helped. When investigators asked Carlos who might have had a reason to hurt his mother, he didn't hesitate to name Angel. According to him, only his younger brother harbored enough resentment toward Denise to actually want to harm her. Carlos also admitted that he believed Angel was capable of hurting him too, but for some unknown reason, Angel didn't do that. He added that he no longer felt safe and feared what might happen next. After speaking with Carlos, authorities moved quickly to locate and question Angel, who was now considered the primary suspect. However, this proved to be more difficult than expected. No one seemed to know where Angel was. Since being removed from the Hollowell household by Child Welfare Services, Angel had cycled through several foster homes but never managed to settle anywhere. He struggled with social interaction, couldn't get along with others, displayed ongoing aggression, and frequently ran away. About a year before the incident, Angel had run away from yet another foster home, and this time he completely vanished. His whereabouts remained unknown, and now investigators feared he might have returned to carry out an act of revenge against Denise, with whom he had always had a difficult and volatile relationship. There were several troubling details at the scene that seemed to support that theory. There were no signs of forced entry. The weapon used in the attack, an axe, was taken from the backyard. Nothing was stolen from the house. In fact, cash and a debit card were still sitting untouched on the nightstand next to Denise. This indicated that the motive wasn't robbery. Whoever did this had a personal reason, and it looked like Denise had been deliberately targeted. Authorities canvassed the neighborhood in Inverness, Citrus County, hoping for leads, but most neighbors had little to offer. No one could say anything negative about the Hollowell family. In fact, people described Denise as calm, well-spoken, and thoughtful. Although she and the boys hadn't lived there long, her late parents had been familiar faces in the community. However, some residents began to recall strange and troubling events that started shortly after Denise and her sons moved into house. Local pets had begun disappearing, first a few cats, then dogs. Shortly after the initial reports of missing pets, the situation in the area worsened. Residents started to report the disappearance of young livestock, such as baby goats and other small animals. When these animals were eventually found, the conditions were shocking. Many showed signs of what appeared to be intentional harm, deep cuts, torn wounds, and, in some cases, severe injuries that disfigured them. Their eyes were damaged, indicating deliberate cruelty. Several locals informed law enforcement about these incidents, but the cases did not seem to be a priority. The officers appeared to be focused on more urgent matters than investigating animal cruelty and missing pets. Interestingly, none of the residents connected these horrific acts to the Hollowell family. Denise and her sons had even assisted in searching for some of the missing pets. They regularly spoke with their neighbors, though she wasn't particularly close to anyone and rarely had visitors at her home. Many people were unaware of what was happening behind the doors. Most didn't know that Angel had been moved to another adoptive family. They assumed he had gone to live with relatives in town, just like Carlos had during an earlier period. Investigators became interested in Carlos's past, particularly the time he spent living with relatives. They decided to inquire further to understand the reasons behind this situation. It turned out that Carlos had faced significant behavioral issues. At the age of 14, he began drinking alcohol and trying different additives. His behavior became unpredictable and aggressive, causing him to lash out at his mother and younger brother. In response, Denise sought professional help, leading to Carlos being diagnosed with bipolar disorder and signs of obsessive-compulsive tendencies. His symptoms worsened due to his alcohol and addictive use. He briefly stayed in a treatment facility but was discharged with a prescription for medication, which he refused to take and ultimately discarded. At 16, Carlos stopped going to school but kept this a secret from his mother for some time. Each morning, he pretended to leave for class. When Denise eventually found out, it led to a serious confrontation, especially after Carlos took a dangerous mix of painkillers and alcohol, which almost cost him his life. Denise called emergency services just in time, and the medical staff were able to stabilize him. Following this frightening experience, a relative named Stephanie offered her support. Her own son had faced similar challenges, including bipolar disorder and behavioral issues during his teenage years. Stephanie had researched these topics extensively and tried various therapeutic methods at home. Over time, her son seemed to grow past his difficult phase. He matured, pursued an education, and eventually moved to another city for a more stable life. Stephanie firmly believed that her approach, which she considered her own form of therapy, was the key to her son's recovery. Although she had no formal training, relied on online resources and books, she felt confident in her methods. She proposed that Carlos temporarily move into her home for what she called treatment. Carlos lived at Stephanie's house for about 6 months, during which Denise visited him regularly. Stephanie held what she called therapy sessions and suggested recording them for later review. These recordings were kept at her home and became crucial evidence after a tragedy involving Denise. The tapes revealed a troubling dynamic between Denise and Carlos. Instead of support, Denise frequently blamed Carlos for her life's difficulties. She expressed regret about adopting him, called him names, and made him feel unwanted, saying he would never be loved. During this time, Denise was also struggling financially. She lost her teaching job and was getting by with unstable side jobs. She pressured Carlos to find work to help pay for household expenses. At one point, she stopped buying him clothes, claiming she couldn't afford it, and eventually refused to feed him, telling him he had to buy his own food. The situation worsened as Denise became verbally abusive, cruelly referencing Carlos's adoption. She would say things like they had rescued him from the streets and that without her, he would be suffering from hunger or illness in a bad neighborhood. She made offensive, reminded him of the expenses involved in his adoption, and even demanded that he repay those costs. About a month before the tragedy, Carlos expressed a wish to return to live with his adoptive mother. Following Stephanie's advice, he even created a list of reasons for wanting to move back, with one of his main goals being to mend his relationship with Denise. Denise supported his ambition to attend college, believing education was essential for his future, and she promised to help with tuition costs if possible. Stephanie also suggested that Denise set up surveillance cameras in several rooms of the house, particularly in areas where she and Carlos spent time together, so she could keep an eye on his behavior remotely. Although the idea felt odd to Denise, she agreed, partly out of caution. It was evident she didn't completely trust Carlos and worried he might act out in anger. Strangely, those cameras and Denise's phone vanished from the house. The surveillance system had been turned off the day before the incident. Carlos insisted he wasn't involved and claimed that Denise managed everything regarding the cameras. As for the phone, he stated he hadn't seen it and had no idea where it could be. A week before the tragedy, Denise and Carlos had a serious argument that became physical. A neighbor saw what happened and stepped in, telling them he would call the police if it occurred again. After Denise's death, Carlos became a person of interest, but there wasn't enough solid evidence to charge him at that time. The authorities questioned him but let him go. Meanwhile, the main suspect was still his missing brother, Angel. The day after the incident, a local teenager, who was a neighbor and friend of Carlos, came to express his condolences. They were about the same age and had a casual friendship, but Carlos didn't seem upset. Instead, he told his friend that he just needed to make it through the next 3 weeks until he turned 18. After that, he planned to sell the so-called House of Horrors and leave the area for good. His friend was surprised by both Carlos's words and the eerily calm way he spoke. The friend shared this conversation with his parents, who then contacted the police, leading to Carlos being questioned again. However, he did not provide any new information. In response, investigators decided to bring in a dive team to search the lake behind the Hollowell property, suspecting that the missing cameras and Denise's phone might have been discarded there. The lake was not very large, and the team quickly found the items. Unfortunately, the cameras were of no use. They had been turned off before the incident and recorded no footage. However, the phone provided crucial information. Data showed that it had been powered down, likely after entering the water, just 10 minutes before Carlos called emergency services. This helped investigators accurately determine the approximate time of the attack. Carlos claimed he had been asleep at the time of the incident and only woke up when he heard dogs barking outside. However, the analysis of his phone usage suggested otherwise, showing that his phone had been active just before Denise was attacked. A neighbor also reported seeing Carlos outside around 5:30 p.m., heading toward the backyard shed. When presented with this evidence, including the neighbor's statement, Carlos became evasive and inconsistent in his answers. Eventually, he admitted he had gone outside during that time, stating he was splitting firewood behind the house to relieve stress after arguing with his mother. He mentioned going back inside for a glass of water, sitting in the kitchen for about 5 minutes, and then hearing the dogs barking. When he stepped outside, he didn't see anyone who might have let the dogs out. Assuming it was his mother, he went to her bedroom and found her lying on the bed with an axe in the back of her head. Carlos maintained his innocence. His lawyer developed a defense based on this claim. They argue that there was no physical evidence linking Carlos to the crime, and since Angel was still missing, so investigators had to keep Carlos as a potential suspect. A significant breakthrough in the case occurred in early 2020 when authorities located Angel. He had been living in another state in a juvenile detention facility after being arrested for a burglary. Because he used a false identity, it took time to identify him correctly. Records indicated that Angel was already in custody at the time of the crime, which meant he could not have been involved in Denise's case. He was brought back to Florida to testify in court. On the witness stand, Angel described his brother as a source of torment for both him and their adoptive mother. He accused Carlos of being responsible for the troubling incidents of animal cruelty in their neighborhood. Faced with overwhelming evidence and unable to shift the blame, Carlos ultimately accepted a plea deal and confessed to the crime. However, when asked about his motive, he had difficulty providing a clear explanation. He mentioned his dislike for his mother, his desire to sell the house, and a wish to escape. They were just thoughts that came to him while chopping firewood. This was framed rather as a spontaneous reaction. Carlos even claimed to have had a brief mental breakdown. However, the fact that the surveillance cameras were turned off in advance and later removed suggested a level of planning and preparation. In July 9, 2021, Carlos was convicted of intentionally killing Denise Hollowell and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Because he was a minor at the time of the crime, the court allowed him to seek a review of his sentence in 2044. The al-Maliki family moved to the United States from Iraq when Noor was 4 years old. She was the first of 7 children born to Faileh Hassan al-Maliki and Siyam. Her name, Noor, means light of God. Although she fully embraced American culture, she also maintained her Iraqi heritage. She spoke Arabic fluently and identified as a Muslim, like her parents. However, in early 2009, she moved out from her parents' home after a disagreement about her lifestyle choices, which included wearing tight jeans, makeup, having boyfriends, and participating in modeling. Noor's pictures, many taken from her Facebook and MySpace accounts, circulated widely on the internet. They featured a beautiful young woman with long black hair and a thoughtful expression. Noor seldom smiled in these photos, possibly due to her past experience with braces. However, her friends describe her as cheerful and humorous. At school, she was known for being fun-loving and easily made friends. She played tennis. Her style consisted of dark jeans, sandals, and flowing tops from Forever 21. In short, Noor was an American girl just like any other. At home, Noor lived in a much harsher environment. She was often responsible for taking care of her younger siblings. Her father, Faileh, was strict and controlling, He disapproved of her socializing with boys, wearing jeans, or sharing photos of herself online. Noor's main duty was to obey his orders or face punishment. He believed that the only change in her life would come when she married a man he chose for her back in Iraq. However, Noor envisioned a different future for herself. Having spent 16 years in the United States, she dreamed of becoming a teacher, marrying someone she truly loved, and most importantly, having the freedom to make her own decisions. Noor's friends have different accounts of what happened, but it's evident that her marriage was a focus for her parents. They deceived her into traveling to Iraq by saying they needed to visit a sick relative, but once they arrived, Noor discovered that she was there to be married. It's unclear if a wedding actually occurred. Some friends say she only attended an engagement ceremony, while others believe she was married against her will. Her parents, in police reports, insisted that a marriage did happen. Regardless, Noor returned to Arizona a few months later, without a husband, and moved back in with her family. Friends say she missed her younger siblings, and her parents needed assistance in taking care of them. The Al-Maliki family lived in a subdivision in Phoenix called Paradise Views, which looked comfortable and suggested they were achieving some of the tangible aspects of the American dream. Noor's mother had been hired by a California company to help prepare American soldiers for cultural differences they might encounter in the Middle East. This was an odd situation, given her struggle to fulfill a similar role in her own daughter's life. After Noor returned from Iraq, the atmosphere in the Al-Maliki home became tense. Noor took care of her siblings and worked on her school assignments for her high school diploma. However, by May 2008, tensions peaked. Noor's father discovered a photo of her with male friends on MySpace and disapproved. The conflict escalated to the point where Noor considered moving out. One day, after Noor using the family car to visit a cousin, her father reported it stolen. When Noor found out, she abandoned the car on the side of the road and walked away. According to police records, her father wanted to press charges against her to teach her a lesson, claiming that she was bringing shame to the family and that her plans to move out looked bad. Eventually, Noor did move in with a friend, but after several confrontations with her father and discovering that her mother gave her friend's family a hard time, so she decided to return home. Noor's 20th birthday in February 2009 became a breaking point. After another family fight, this one in the middle of the night, she phoned a friend to come and get her. Noor came running out the door wearing her pajamas, carrying a purse and a roll of gift wrap, as her father chased her across the lawn. Noor jumped into the back seat, and the friend drove away. That night, Noor moved in with the friend who had picked her up, ultimately enlisting the police to protect her as she retrieved her things from the family home. In the spring of 2009, Noor got her own apartment. Her friends helped her furnish it with a new mirror and a cloudy TV they found on Craigslist for $25. Noor worked hard to support herself. When her parents learned where she was working, they started showing up and insisting that she move back home. She then got a job across town as a hostess at Applebee's. They turned up there too, leaving her no choice but to abandon that job as well. With no source of income, she was forced to return home once more. The final blow-up came that summer. In June 2009, longtime family friend Amal Khalif awoke to find Noor sleeping in the family's van parked in the driveway. Noor said her parents had hit her. Amal, a mother of 4, took her in. To Noor's family, this was the ultimate indignity. Their daughter had chosen to live with another Iraqi family instead of her own. On July 20th, Noor's parents entered Amal's home unannounced and began banging on her bedroom door. Amal dialed 911 after Noor's father started regularly harassing the family. Amal's husband, Raiken, explained to him that Noor was free to live where she chose. "This is America," he said. In the weeks that followed, Noor began a romantic relationship with Marwan, Amal's son. When Noor's father learned about this, he threatened her, insisting that if she didn't leave her current home, there would be severe consequences. Although Noor attempted to obtain a restraining order, she never completed the necessary paperwork. On October 20th, 2009, at 1:06 p.m., Noor sent a text message to a friend saying, "Her dad is here at the welfare office." She hadn't seen her father, Fele, since moving out of their home in Glendale months earlier, and his presence filled her with fear. She was aware that he would stop at nothing to regain control over her life. Noor was inside an Arizona Department of Economic Security office in Peoria when she sent the message, sitting next to Amal, Marwan's mother. The al-Maliki family, especially Noor's father, felt anger and shame regarding her situation. In their view, a man's daughters are his property and must live with him until he chooses otherwise. Amal was at the office to fill out a change of address form for welfare benefits. Originally from Iraq, she had moved to the United States about 10 years ago. Since her English wasn't very strong, her friend accompanied her to help with translation. That day marked a troubling moment for Fele, as he took a disturbing step toward becoming an accused honor murderer. After her father entered the Department of Economic Security office, Noor sent a second text message to her best friend, Ashna Khan. Noor said that her dad was a manipulative jerk and that she had never met anyone so cruel. Meanwhile, Amal observed that Fele took a number at the counter and sat down near her and Noor. He was on his cell phone just as Noor was texting. He spoke for 5 minutes with his son, who was 18 months younger than Noor. Fele also chatted with a male relative in Detroit and his wife several times. Minutes after arriving, Fele left the office without saying anything. At 1:32, Noor sent a final text to Ashna that suggested she was feeling more at ease. Noor asked her friend if she would have time to meet. Eventually, Amal's number was called, and she and Noor approached the counter to handle their tasks. Amal remained suspicious of Fele, aware of his anger over her letting Noor move in with her. Before leaving the Arizona Department of Economic Security office, Amal wanted to check the parking lot for Fele and his 2000 silver gray Jeep Cherokee. Noor appeared less concerned. She mentioned that her dad might spit on her if he had the opportunity, but she seemed don't want to change her mind. The area looked clear, so they made their way to Amal's van. However, Amal soon realized that she had locked her keys inside the vehicle. She and Noor returned to the Arizona Department of Economic Security office to regroup. Amal then called her son and asked him to bring a spare key from home, which was about 20 minutes away. It was a sunny day with a temperature of 85 degrees Fahrenheit when Amal decided to wait outside the office. However, Noor was feeling thirsty and suggested they go to a nearby Mexican restaurant for a cold drink. As they walked west along the sidewalk beside the office and crossed the parking lot, Amal suddenly noticed a vehicle heading towards them. In a split second, she raised her hands instinctively to try to stop it. To her shock, she recognized Fele behind the wheel. The car collided with them, Amal dragging Noor across a raised median. The impact threw Amal about 27 feet away, leaving her unconscious and bleeding on the pavement. She sustained a broken pelvis, a broken femur, numerous cuts and bruises, but remained conscious. The Peoria police later estimated that the car was traveling at about 30 miles per hour. Fele raced out of the parking lot and headed west on Peoria Avenue. Noor sustained critical injuries, including severe brain and spinal injuries, as well as multiple fractures. Amal later told police that they were extremely upset with both her and Noor over their living situation. She indicated that Fele was determined to assert his control over his daughter. Shortly after fleeing the scene, Fele made calls on his cell phone to his wife, son, and at least 2 other family members. It was unclear whether his attack on the women was impulsive or premeditated. 3 detectives from the Peoria police arrived at the al-Maliki home at 5 p.m. on October 20th, about 3 hours after the incident. Noor's brother, Ali, answered the door. He found himself in a difficult situation. He had been close to Noor in the past, but the ongoing conflict between Noor and their parents had strained their relationship, leading to weeks of silence between the siblings. He later informed friends in an email that he had started using hurtful names for his sister before they stopped communicating. Ali told Detective Chris Bowie that tensions had been rising at their parents' home since Noor returned from Iraq after leaving her arranged marriage. In his opinion, Noor had brought shame to the al-Maliki family. He claimed she had shown a lack of respect towards their parents and him since her return. She also continued to reject traditional Iraqi values. Ali shared his own struggles with his father, describing him as a habitual gambler who often visited Indian casinos in the Phoenix area. His mother, Siam, had been trying to reach him over the past few hours, indicating that something had happened to Noor. However, Ali insisted to the detectives that he had no knowledge of what had happened to her. On October 24th, Ali spoke to a television reporter about his sister. He mentioned that she had been making an effort to be disrespectful to their parents. He pointed out the differences between Iraqi and American cultures, saying, different cultures, different values. What makes sense to one culture doesn't necessarily make sense to another. Still, he expressed his profound sadness, saying, seeing Noor at the hospital just broke his heart. Nobody should have to go through that. Fele crossed the Mexican border into Nogales, Sonora, around the same time that Ali was being questioned in Glendale. He soon parked his Jeep in a mall parking lot and checked into a hotel. At 5:30 p.m., he called his cousin in Phoenix. The next day, October 21st, Peoria police issued a warrant for Fele's arrest, alleging at that point 2 counts of aggravated assault. That day, a detective contacted Noor's mother via phone. She mentioned that she was driving back from her job in California. She claimed that all she knew was that there was a family problem of an unspecified nature. The detective, Bill Lang, then informed Siam that her husband had intentionally slammed into Noor and Amal with his Jeep and fled. Siam told Lang that the woman was a liar and that her family was dirty, referring to Amal. Siam repeatedly insisted that she hadn't communicated with her husband about the incident. Bill informed Siam that Noor's condition was grave. Siam replied that she wanted to see her daughter as soon as possible, but the detective expressed concern that Siam and others might pose further danger to Noor. On October 22nd, 2 days after the assaults, a Glendale pharmacist informed police that someone had phoned in a prescription for Fele. He remained a fugitive. That day, Peoria detectives learned that on October 22nd, a young man, possibly of Middle Eastern descent, and a woman wearing a veil had picked up prescription medicine for diabetes in Fele's name. Detectives returned to the Ali home on October 26th for a follow-up interview with Ali and his mother, Siam. By then, the detectives had examined phone records, which showed that Fele had been in touch with his immediate family and others around the time of the assaults. Siam admitted that she had lied in her earlier interview with police but continued to deny knowing her husband's whereabouts. Mother and son also admitted they had picked up the medicine at the pharmacy, but Siam insisted she had thrown the pill bottles out of her car window, although she couldn't provide a reason for having done so. Siam again blamed her one-time friend Amal for what had happened in the Arizona Department of Economic Security office parking lot. Siam alleged that Amal got what was coming to her because she was the matriarch of a family that was allegedly flush with banned substance abusers and thieves. Later that evening, Ali met alone with Detective Bill at a Glendale restaurant, away from his mother. He provided new details of his father's call to him before the assaults. Fele had just seen Noor and Amal at the Arizona Department of Economic Security office, he said. Ali explained that his father sounded angry, so Ali told he to go home. However, Fele later phoned Ali to say he had run down Noor and Amal with his car. He told Ali to man up because he wouldn't be around anymore. On October 25th, British customs officials informed U.S. immigration authorities that Fele was in custody in London. He had arrived on a plane from Mexico City using his own name and U.S. passport. A computer check showed that Fele was a wanted man in Arizona. British customs soon put him on a Delta flight to Atlanta, where the federal authorities have a port of entry for incoming fugitives. On October 28th, Mexican authorities in Nogales contacted Peoria police, reporting that they had found Fele's Jeep in a mall parking lot. Crime scene investigators later found hair fibers, human tissue on and under the front bumper of the vehicle. On October 29th, Peoria detectives Chris Bowie and Jeff Balson sat across from their suspect in Georgia. Fele waived his Miranda rights against self-incrimination, allowing the detectives to question him. Initially, Fele told them that he had run over the 2 women in a freak accident. He tried to sound reasonable, why he would kill his daughter with a vehicle if he wanted to do so. Fele mentioned that if he wanted to kill her, he would go buy a gun and that he knew where they lived. He stated that he had no problem with her and that this was not the first time she had left the house. He insisted that he had just lost control of the car. Detective Bill warned him that anger could lead to loss of self-control. Fele continued to insist that no premeditation was involved. Like his wife, he blamed Amal for what had happened, claiming she had stolen their daughter from them. He insisted that he loved Noor, noting that his cell phone contained several photos of her, but he argued that it was wrong for her to become too Americanized. Fele claimed he had stayed at a Nogales hotel for 2 nights, during which time a stranger had given him about $1,900 in cash for his Jeep and agreed to make sure some paperwork got to Ali. Although unconfirmed, a more likely scenario, Fele's cousin or someone else close to Fele delivered the money, diabetes medicine, and a suitcase filled with clothes that Fele had with him when British authorities arrested him. Detective Bill asked Fele whether his family was on his side. Fele didn't reply directly. Instead, he said he would certainly help a friend or family member in a similar predicament. It's their culture, he explained. When Fele asked what he would do if he had such a disobedient daughter, Detective Bill replied that he would not run his daughter over with a car. He finally confessed that he had actually intended to harm Noor and Amal. Fele was booked into the Clayton County Jail, Georgia, and waived extradition on October 31st. The Peoria detectives escorted him back to Arizona. The judge set his bail at $5 million. Doctors at hospital pronounced Noor clinically brain dead at 7 a.m. on November 2nd. Several members, including her mother and brother, were by Noor's bedside when her heart stopped beating at 11:54 a.m. A urinary tract infection that spread to Noor's heart was the cause of death. Days later, a Maricopa County grand jury indicted Fele on charges of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and leaving the scene of an accident. Noor's violent death struck a nerve worldwide, especially after a county prosecutor officially labeled it an honor killing. Noor's life was never the same after she rebelled against her parents and their culture, leaving her arranged marriage. Time and again, she tried to live with her family over the final year of her life, but it didn't work. Fele and Siam considered her tainted, someone who had humiliated them by leaving the Iraqi husband her father had chosen for her. Fele was furious when, after Noor returned from Iraq, he found a photo of her with several male friends. In his mind, Noor shouldn't have been chummy with men other than her husband, to whom she remained legally married. However, Noor stood up for herself. The photographs on her page were not racy, just images of a young woman with a beautiful face. Noor then found work as a server at an Applebee's restaurant, where she made new friends. One of her co-workers recalls that Noor quit after her father learned that she was employed at an establishment that served liquor. Some of Fele and Siam's concerns about their daughter's living arrangements may have been justified. Amal reported to Peoria police that she took in Noor because she had nowhere to go after leaving her parents' home. Amal's primary concern was providing shelter for Noor, not supporting a romantic relationship between Noor and her son. She emphasized that just days before the assaults, she encouraged Noor to reach out to her parents to start a conversation. Following his arrest and incarceration at the Maricopa County Jail, Fele regularly spoke on the phone with family members, unaware that authorities were secretly recording the calls. During one conversation, he asked his cousin, "How is she now?" They spoke in Arabic, which was later translated into English. When his cousin asked, "Who's she?" Fele replied, "Noor." His cousin then confirmed, "She's gone." His cousin advised he to take care of himself and to talk to their lawyers about making it clear that it was not supposed to be a murder. He also suggested that ask the Iraqi consulate to intervene with the American government, linking the situation to concepts of honor and dishonor. He stated, "An Iraqi is worth nothing without honor." Fele continued to talk with his wife about the issue of honor killings during their phone conversations. The trial began in January 2011 and was notable as the first honor killing case to be tried in Arizona. Amal Khalif testified for the prosecution. On February 22, 2011, a Phoenix jury convicted Fele al-Maliki, an immigrant from Iraq, of second-degree murder for running over and killing his daughter. Prosecutors labeled the case as an honor killing, arguing that Fele acted because he perceived his daughter as becoming too westernized. Fele was also found guilty of aggravated assault for injuring Amal Khalif during the incident in a parking lot in suburban Phoenix in October 2009. He faced 2 additional charges for leaving the scene of the accident. Defense attorneys argued that his daughter's death and the injuries to Amal were accidental, claiming he only intended to spit on Amal, whom he believed was influencing his daughter to distance herself from their family. However, during police questioning, a detective testified that Fele admitted to intentionally running over his daughter, though in the recorded interview he referred to the incident as an accident. Amal also testified during the 4-week trial, stating that he ignored Noor's cries to stop before he hit her. He showed little emotion when the jury read the verdict. In April 2011, Fele was sentenced, at age 50, on multiple counts. For murdering his daughter, he was sentenced to 16 years. For injuring her boyfriend's mother, he received 15 years. And for leaving the scene of a crime without permission, he received 3.5 years. Because they are to be served consecutively, Fele received a total of 34.5 years in prison as his penalty. Ali and his family chose to remain silent during the sentencing. Accompanied by his 2 attorneys, Fele approached the lectern in front of the judge and began by apologizing in a soft voice to everyone present, to Amal, to his own family, and to the judge. Fele wished he were dead instead of Noor, Fele said. The expression of remorse was a far cry from what he had said to his wife in the secretly recorded jailhouse tapes after his arrest. The tapes revealed that his sole concern was how to fabricate a story that would divert attention from him. Judge Steinle took more than half an hour to impose the sentence. He stated that it had troubled him from day one that the press had given the case a moniker. It was referred to as an honor killing, and this bothered him. He cannot believe that a religion would allow someone to kill another human being. He would be in prison for 13 more years before dying on November 10, 2024, at 63 years of age. Fele al-Maliki's conviction and 34.5-year sentence brought legal justice, but it could not undo the loss of a vibrant young woman. Noor's story remains a poignant reminder of the cost of intolerance and the enduring fight for individual autonomy. Karen Slattery, born September 18, 1969. She has a younger sister named Debbie. The relationship between the 2 sisters grew closer. The Slattery family lives in a spacious house with a pool near the beach in the small resort town of Delray Beach, Florida. From an early age, Karen was friendly, healthy, and spirited. In high school, Karen considered starting to work at the educational institution she attended. There was a program that offered courses for aspiring nannies. After completing the training, it became clear that Karen was a natural nanny because she got along well with children. She was even trusted to look after the children of local police officers, making her quite popular and in demand in this field. Around the same time, she discovered a new passion for diving and excelled to the point. At that time, Karen's family lived in one of the safest areas. Not only was it a wealthy community, but outsiders rarely wandered in. However, on Sunday, March 24th, an event unfolded that shattered this ideal life. That day, her mother took 14-year-old Karen off at the Helm family home, where she would care for their 2 children, ages 3 and 7. The children's parents promised to return around midnight to take Karen home. Around 9 p.m., it was time for the girls to get ready for bed, and by 9:30 p.m., the children were fast asleep. Karen went back to the living room, called a friend to discuss plans for an upcoming trip, and then called a classmate who was also a nanny. After chatting, she mentioned she was going to have a snack and would call back shortly. However, Karen never made that call. She frequently called her mother to provide a sense of security, especially when she was alone in a strange house. The last call to her mom was at 10 p.m., during which she assured her that everything was fine and that she'd be home in a couple of hours. When the children's parents returned home, they immediately noticed that the lights were off throughout the house, even though they typically left lights on when Karen was there. They called for her, but there was no response. They walked down the hallway to the kitchen and found a large pool of blood next to a broken telephone. There was no body, but a bloody trail led from the kitchen toward the bedroom, where light was visible under the door. The husband instructed his wife to run outside and call the police, while he hesitated, debating whether to open the door, fearing that the criminal might still be inside and armed. Ultimately, he chose to wait for the police. When law enforcement entered the bedroom, they discovered the body of Karen next to the bed. She was stripped below the waist, and it appeared she had been abused. Karen had multiple stab wounds, and her face was so mutilated that it was difficult to identify her. She was recognized by her clothing. During the investigation of the crime scene, chewed gum was found in the bedroom, along with a broken window with a cut mesh screen through which the killer likely entered. Outside, footprints were found, as well as a bare footprint in front of the broken window. Inside the house, there were also traces of bare feet, suggesting the criminal removed his shoes before entering. The house were examined with luminol, revealing numerous traces of blood. A large quantity of blood was also discovered in the shower, indicating that the killer had used it after the crime. In the kitchen, where the attack had occurred, the most footprints were found, along with a bloody hammer, which was believed to be the weapon used in the initial blow. However, the knife used to mutilate the victim was never found. At first glance, no valuables appeared to be missing. After examining the crime scene, detectives visited Karen's home to inform her parents of the tragic news. It was well past midnight, and her parents were anxiously waiting for her. They could not call the Helms. They assumed Helms were simply delayed and that their daughter would return later, but it turned out to be much worse. This incident shocked the local community. It had always been one of the quietest and safest places in the area. The main suspects initially became the Helms couple. The police searched for any suspicious clues, particularly since the family had moved out of the house just days after the murder. However, this idea was quickly dismissed. It turned out that the family simply could not feel safe in the house. No signs of a struggle were found on the spouses' bodies, no blood stains were present on their clothes, and their footprints did not match the criminals, leading to their exclusion from the list of suspects. After a more thorough examination of the Helms house, it was confirmed that nothing valuable was missing. The only item that could not be found was a pair of leather gloves. Perhaps the criminal used them to avoid leaving fingerprints. The forensic expert determined that Karen received 18 wounds, inflicted by a knife similar to a penknife, approximately 7-8 centimeters long. Her throat was cut 4 times, leaving Karen unable to speak or call for help. Of the 11 wounds, 7 were fatal. The victim rapidly bled to death. The attack was so swift that Karen did not even have time to react or resist the criminal. No defensive wounds were found on her. According to the forensic expert, when she was dragged into the bedroom, she was already unconscious, and the abuse occurred only afterward. The collected samples were sent to the lab for examination, but given the technology of 1984, this process took many months. Karen's funeral took place on March 29, 1984, and many rallied around the Slattery family during that time. The family was heartbroken. The victim's sister, Debbie, was also present at the funeral. Even 40 years later, she recalled how devastating the experience was for her. During the funeral, Debbie, who was an 11-year-old child at the time, thought her sister was just sleeping when she saw her in the coffin. She reached out and touched Karen's nose, at which point she realized that Karen was, in fact, dead. Her mother yelled at her, and this incident at the funeral only worsened Debbie's trauma. No one knew why it happened. Debbie couldn't even sleep, fearing that she might become the next victim of the criminal. Their family was in danger. Local residents were also worried, demanding that the detectives quickly solve the case and find the perpetrator in order to secure the streets of the city. A family friend created a memorial fund intended to raise awareness and gather information. Various fundraising events were held, including charity concerts and sports tournaments, which managed to accumulate $50,000, a significant sum by 1980 standards. This serious reward aimed to help find witnesses who would come forward with valuable information about the tragedy. People were very scared. The number of other crimes had increased compared to the previous year, which sparked true hysteria. By mid-April, rumors were circulating up and down the coast, even among school children. At one point, students began to suspect a boy who knew Karen. The day after the murder, everyone noticed that he came to school with scratched hands. Later, he carved the words "Trust no one" into his desk, leading to a report to the police. An investigation cleared him of suspicion but provided a new lead, which also turned out to be a dead end. Another possible suspect emerged, Christopher Wilder. He emigrated to the USA from his native Australia in 1971. Throughout the 70s, he was a recurrent suspect in abuse assault cases. Wilder abducted, abused, and killed girls, including models he lured to photo shoots, claiming at least 12 victims. He used various methods to carry out his crimes, including shooting, stabbing, strangulation, and even electric shock as a form of torture. When police finally tracked him down, a shootout occurred, resulting in Christopher being killed. People were quick to spread rumors that Christopher Wilder had also attacked Karen, as he had been in the area at the time of the crime. This even led to attempts to tighten legislation for abuse offenders. However, it was later confirmed that he was accounted for in Oklahoma on the day of the murder. No one mourned Karen's death more than her father, Eugene. He had already lost a father, mother, and now his eldest daughter was gone. The entire family actively participated in public activities and became part of a group called Parents of Murdered Children. Together with volunteers, they distributed more than 500 posters featuring Karen's image, hoping this would help lead the police to the criminal. Thanks to these efforts, some interesting information did emerge. One witness claimed that on the night of the 24th, a suspicious man was seen walking along the street a few blocks from where Karen was murdered. Unfortunately, this lead turned out to be a dead end due to the lack of details. During this time, the sheriff's department acquired a new laser technology that improved their fingerprint collection process. This device sped up the gathering of evidence and unveiled details that were previously overlooked. Investigators utilized it at the murder scene and successfully collected numerous new fingerprints overnight that had gone unnoticed before. They had just started analyzing this new evidence when another crime occurred 10 kilometers away from the previous murder site on May 29, 1984, just 2 months after the attack on Karen. The police were dispatched to a house in the nearby small town of Boca Raton. Upon arrival, officers discovered a petite 38-year-old woman lying in bed, covered in blood, with a pillow obscuring her face and a disfigured head underneath. The victim, Georgiana Wardens, had been struck with a hammer. The hammer was also found nearby, similar to the case of Karen. Georgiana, born on February 3, 1946, was a divorced mother of 2. Georgiana worked hard to support her children. On the day of her death, Georgiana had visited relatives and friends before returning home. She and her children went to bed around 11:30 p.m. Everything seemed normal. The next morning, her eldest daughter, 13-year-old, woke up to the sound of the phone ringing. Normally, Georgiana would answer, but this time there was no response. When the girl went downstairs to answer the call, she decided to check on her mother. When she knocked on the bedroom door without receiving an answer, she entered the room and discovered her mother's lifeless body on the bed, with blood everywhere. Terrified, she called her father. When the father arrived, he contacted the police. Officers found evidence of 2 attempted break-ins at the crime scene. The attacker had tortured, abused Georgiana before showering and leaving, much like the previous case with Karen. A knife was discovered in the room and was sent for examination. Georgiana had suffered 5 stab wounds and multiple blunt force trauma injuries likely caused by the same hammer found at the scene. There were also deep lacerations in her genital area and signs of strangulation on her neck. Forensic experts determined that after receiving her injuries, she likely lived for no more than 5 minutes, and the extreme violence suggested the attacker may have been someone known to her. Investigators checked her ex-husband but quickly cleared him due to a solid alibi. Forensic experts searched the area around the house and found a suspicious package in a vacant lot across the street, containing a pair of bloody sneakers wrapped in a towel that matched items from Georgiana's home. The police requested assistance from neighboring towns that had previously used laser technology to collect fingerprints. In the 1980s, there was no CODIS database, so investigative resources were limited. Detective began analyzing suspicious cases from recent months. He noticed commonalities among the victims, including Karen and Georgiana, who, despite their age difference, shared similar physical traits and both had their faces covered during the attacks. Both crimes occurred with a knife and a hammer being used. On May 22nd, a young man from Boca Raton, who returned home late one evening to his mother's house, noticed a stranger attempting to break in through the window. He chased after him, but the criminal escaped on a high-speed bicycle. However, the young man managed to catch up with him, forcing the criminal to abandon his bicycle and flee. Before climbing into the house, the assailant had removed his shoes, leaving his sneakers behind. On May 28, another crime occurred. A nearby restaurant was robbed, and a 20-year-old waitress was assaulted and held at gunpoint, with the perpetrator escaping with $600. Law enforcement in both cities worked diligently to find leads to stop this series of crimes. Meanwhile, community activists sought changes in legislation to address these violent offenses. The detective discovered a connection between all these events, but his suspicions needed to be confirmed. She was able to provide a fairly detailed description. The detective compared the sketch he had created with a stack of photographs of criminals known for abuse assaults. Finally, this led to a result. She helped create the sketch identified one of the criminals as Dwayne Owen, a man with an extensive criminal history, multiple convictions for robbery and abuse crimes. Thus, authorities had a prime suspect, but unfortunately, he had gone on the run. On May 30th, a patrol officer noticed a suspicious man leaving the city on a bicycle. The patrol officer stopped him and asked for an identification. He was 23-year-old Dwayne Owen, who was wanted. All the officers had received a bulletin with his photo. At the station, he was fingerprinted, and comparisons with the crime scene evidence confirmed that he was indeed a very dangerous criminal. In addition to his long list of outstanding arrest warrants, he was considered a suspect in the Georgiana Wardens and Karen Slattery cases. The detective interrogated him. Their conversation lasted about 20 hours. During this time, Dwayne never asked for a lawyer. He confessed to several burglaries, admitted to leaving his sneakers and bicycle behind during one unsuccessful break-in, but he denied any involvement in the murders of Karen and Georgiana. Curiously, Dwayne appeared to enjoy playing cat and mouse with the detective, even reciting poetry and boasting about his criminal talents, as if seeking praise. The detective then contacted another investigator who had previously worked with Dwayne in 1982, engaging with him daily for several weeks. Ultimately, with the help of another officer, Dwayne admitted that he had killed someone, although he did not provide details. While comparing fingerprints found at the crime scene, they managed to find a match. His print was on the book he had snatched from Georgiana's hands before killing her. Gradually, through various tactics, he extracted information from Dwayne, who ultimately confessed to 2 victims. He described how he selected Georgiana by riding his bike through the neighborhood and peering into the windows of homes until he finally managed to break in. According to him, the crime was not premeditated, as he intended to rob Georgiana, but upon finding her asleep with a book, he decided to take advantage of the situation. After the first blow, she screamed, prompting him to hit her several more times with a hammer to silence her. Dwayne also confessed to abusing her and mentioned that he took a shower before leaving, having already prepared clean clothes, which he left in a vacant lot next to the bicycle. Later, the police found those clothes linked to the murder of Karen, but he did not confess to that crime. All the detective could do was to take casts of the footprints left by the criminal at the Helms house and compare them with Dwayne's own. In any case, this evidence alone was not sufficient to charge him with the second murder. However, the police presented this evidence convincingly, leading Dwayne to believe they had something substantial against him. Dwayne later created a similar story, claiming he was walking down the street and spotted Karen through a window when she was tying the children's hair. He decided to leave, go to a local bar for a few drinks, then return to attack her. At around 11 p.m., he jumped back into the master bedroom through the window, grabbed a pair of women's gloves he found in the room, and grabbed a hammer from the bedroom closet. He looked out the master bedroom door and saw Karen in the living room watching TV. She eventually spotted him and ran toward the phone. Dwayne lunged at Karen and the phone, started stabbing her. Then he took her into the bedroom, just grabbed her legs and pulled her out, with her head behind her, and just closed the door. He said he just needed to abuse her. Dwayne discarded his pocket knife in the nearby sea. He emphasized that he changed his clothes and hid his bloody clothes in the bushes. He accused the detective of doing a poor job, insisting that if they had thoroughly inspected everything, they would have found the clothes. Additionally, he crafted a solid alibi. When he got home, he changed the clock and woke up his brother to remember the time, then reset the clock. If the police had questioned them, this could have supported his alibi. The police re-examined the area around the Helms home and were able to find bloody clothing and a pair of gloves that had gone missing from the Helms house. Notably, he did not harm the children. They remained peacefully asleep in the adjacent rooms. On June 21, 1984, Dwayne Owen was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, burglary, and abuse. The Slattery family realized they could seek justice. Everyone wanted the death penalty for Dwayne, but this was just the first step in a long process. Dwayne could appeal repeatedly and continue to live in prison, but the local community felt relieved that a dangerous killer was off the streets. Dwayne was born on February 13, 1961, in Michigan, into a dysfunctional family with addicted parents, with an alcoholic mother who died when he was 11, a father who committed to end one's own life when Dwayne was 13. He himself had been drinking and using banned substances since he was 9. Dwayne cycled through foster families and eventually ran away. By the age of 18, he had experienced significant violence. He joined the army and aspired to become a criminologist, attending a special school in Michigan, but after committing his first serious crime, that dream ended. Instead, he aimed to become a notorious criminal and moved to Florida to live with his brother. Dwayne began a series of crimes involving women, typically breaking into homes, robbing them, and sometimes abusing them. He accumulated numerous victims. His list of crimes continued to grow. In October 1985, his trial commenced, during which the prosecution presented a recording of Dwayne confessing to the murders of Georgiana and Karen. His lawyer claimed the confession was obtained under duress. The jury did not believe him and found him guilty, resulting in 2 death sentences. As expected, Dwayne filed multiple petitions for clemency. A year later, during another trial, Dwayne's brother spoke about his mental issues, and the defense tried to argue insanity but failed. Dwayne continued to appeal his sentence, ultimately reaching the Supreme Court. He convinced a judge that his confessions were obtained under pressure. In the 1990s, a retrial was ordered, and DNA retesting, aided by advancements in technology, showed a much higher probability of matches to Dwayne. The defense continued to argue insanity. To eliminate doubts, a fellow inmate revealed the location of the knife used in Karen's murder, which Dwayne had confessed to him. The police found the knife at the specified location and then had to exhume Karen's body for comparison, which dealt another blow to the Slattery family. By 1999, the prosecution presented new evidence, a point supported by several experts. Dwayne Owen was sentenced to death again. Detectives suspected Dwayne might be involved in other unsolved murders in the area, but he never confessed to them. His defense team continued to appeal, allowing him to live until June 15, 2023. Dwayne was finally executed, almost 40 years after Karen's death. Her mother, Carolyn, and sister, Debbie, witnessed Dwayne's final moments as he was administered a lethal injection. Debbie tried to make eye contact with the man who took her sister's life, but he kept his eyes closed throughout the ordeal. Dwayne Owen was pronounced dead at 6:14 p.m. after a lethal injection at the Florida State Prison, according to the office of Governor Ron DeSantis. One of Florida's longest-serving death row inmates, Owen was 23 at the time of the attack and 62 when he was executed. Debbie struggled with sleep issues for many years, and after the execution, decided to serve in law enforcement, eventually becoming the deputy sheriff of Monroe County. She stated that since she could not sleep peacefully because of people like Dwayne, she wanted to protect those who could. It was a normal Saturday morning in Bethesda, Maryland, when the manager of a Lululemon store showed up to open for the day. However, the moment she walked inside, she knew something was wrong. The store was a mess, clothes were everywhere, mannequins were knocked over, and the floor had blood on it. At first, it seemed like a terrible robbery gone wrong, but as police started asking questions, the story began to change, and what really happened that night was far worse than anyone imagined. Jana Troxell Murray entered the world on November 22, 1980, in Wichita, Kansas. She was the daughter of David and Phyllis Rosaleen Murray. From a young age, Jaina stood out for her adventurous spirit. She had a deep love for animals and dancing. The giving back was part of who she was. She spent much of her life volunteering, and her friends and family often described her as someone whose smile could light up any room. Jaina also had a passion for travel. Her goal was to set foot on every continent, and she managed to visit all of them. Her hard work earned her a scholarship that took her to Madrid, where she spent 2 years studying at St. Louis University. She later completed her Bachelor of Science degree at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. But Jaina didn't stop there. She pushed forward and eventually earned dual master's degrees in communication and business administration from Johns Hopkins University. For her master's thesis, she focused on Lululemon Athletica, a premium yoga and fitness apparel brand. Naturally, she pursued a position with the company after graduating, and her drive and business instincts quickly landed her a role. By 2011, Jaina was a team leader at the Lululemon store in Bethesda, Maryland. She was also close to finishing her second master's degree. Outside of work and school, Jaina was in a happy relationship with her longtime boyfriend, Fraser Bozell. What she didn't know was that Fraser had begun researching engagement rings. He was preparing to propose. Life was falling into place beautifully for Jaina. Her career was thriving, her education was nearly complete, and her relationship was stronger than ever. A bright future was just around the corner, but everything changed on March 11, 2011. Jaina's promising journey was suddenly cut short by a tragic and unimaginable event. The next morning, on March 12, Rachel Erdley, the manager of the Lululemon store, arrived at the Bethesda location shortly before 8 a.m. to open up. Bethesda was generally considered a quiet, safe area, but when Rachel reached the entrance, she noticed the door wasn't locked. That was her first sign that something was off. As she stepped inside, it was immediately clear that something terrible had happened. The store was in disarray, mannequins were knocked over, clothes were scattered. Still trying to make sense of the chaos, Rachel suddenly heard faint moaning. Someone was still inside and in pain. Overwhelmed with panic and fear, she ran out of the store and straight to the neighboring Apple store. She explained that something was terribly wrong inside. A man offered to go in with her and check it out. Inside, he walked toward the back of the store, moving past the chaos. The space looked like a disaster zone. As he neared the office area, he stumbled upon something unimaginable. A woman with long blonde hair was lying face down in a pool of blood. Before he could fully process the horror, a soft moan caught his attention. It was coming from the bathroom. Inside, he found another woman, her hands and ankles bound with zip ties, her body bloody but still alive. It was clear she was injured and in pain, but she was breathing. The man rushed back to the front of the store and told Rachel to call 911 immediately. First responders arrived quickly and were faced with a gruesome scene. They began the task of identifying the two women. Tragically, the deceased was 30-year-old Jaina Troxell Murray. The survivor, badly hurt but alive, was identified as Brittany Norwood, a 28-year-old employee who had transferred from a Lululemon store in Georgetown just 6 weeks earlier. Brittany's injuries were extensive. Cuts and bruises covered her legs, arms, chest, face, and torso. Zip ties still restrained her, and both women's pants had been slashed, raising disturbing concerns that the attackers may have abused them. Brittany was rushed to the local hospital, visibly shaken and in need of immediate care. Back at the store, investigators began examining Jaina's body. The violence inflicted on her defied belief. Medical examiners would later find 331 wounds on her body, over half of which were concentrated on her chest and face. She had been attacked with at least 6 different tools found scattered throughout the store, most of them likely taken from a store toolbox. Items included a hammer, a box cutter, a wrench, and a knife. Around her neck was a ligature, though it wasn't tight enough to suggest strangulation. Still, it was an odd and unsettling detail. Jaina's body was transported for an autopsy while her devastated parents and boyfriend were notified of her death. The autopsy revealed heartbreaking truths. Jaina had fought with everything she had. Her body bore over 100 defensive wounds. Ultimately, the fatal blow struck the back of her neck. There was evidence that she had tried to escape. The blood trail led toward the store's emergency exit, and there was even blood on the door handle, along with a key still in the lock. Jana's key. The attack had lasted for roughly 20 minutes. Detectives urgently needed answers, but they were met with challenges. The Lululemon store had no external security cameras, which meant they had no footage showing who might have entered or exited the store that night. Investigators turned to the Apple Store's security footage across the street and discovered video from the night before that showed two men dressed in dark clothing walking near the store around the time the attack occurred. However, the footage was taken from too far away to make any definitive identification. With no other leads, detectives turned to the only person who might know the truth, Brittany Norwood. Though Brittany was still clearly traumatized, flinching and recoiling from any physical touch, she eventually shared her account of what had happened. According to Brittany, on the evening of March 11, 2011, she and Jana were on the closing shift. Jana had driven to work, while Brittany took public transit. After locking up the store, they went their separate ways, but shortly after arriving at the metro station, Brittany realized she had left her metro card inside the store. She called another coworker to get Jana's number and then phoned her directly. Despite having nearly reached home, Jana turned back to help Brittany. It was just like her to go out of her way for someone else. At around 10:05 p.m., Jana unlocked the store door, with Brittany right behind her. But the moment the door opened, two masked men in dark clothing pushed their way inside. One was tall, and the other shorter. Both appeared to be white and in their 20s. She said the shorter man attacked her while the taller one took hold of Jana. They forced the women to the back of the store, threatened them, and told Brittany they knew where she lived. She had utility bills in her purse with her address along with her ID. Terrified, Brittany believed the men were robbers, hoped they would just take what they wanted and leave. But instead, she claimed the situation spiraled into violence. Both women were physically assaulted and taunted with racial slurs. Brittany said they were violated, and during the chaos, she could hear Jana screaming. Eventually, the screaming stopped. Brittany said that's when she knew Jana was died. She feared she was next, but then, unexpectedly, the men told her they would spare her life. Why they chose to leave her alive, she didn't know. When Brittany was asked why the attackers spared her, her answer was chilling. They said she was fun to take advantage of. After the violent attack, the suspects allegedly restrained Brittany and left her in a bathroom of the store, where she was later found. The interview with Brittany was cut short so investigators could concentrate on collecting forensic evidence, hoping to find DNA that might identify the attackers. In the meantime, based on Brittany's description, authorities set up surveillance outside the Lululemon store. Soon after, they noticed two men in black clothing, who matched her description, and stopped them for questioning. However, this lead quickly fell apart. The men turned out to be waiters from a nearby restaurant, and they walked that route every night after their shifts. The black clothing was part of their work uniform. After reviewing surveillance footage from previous nights, police confirmed that these two men routinely passed by the store at that same time. Both men had strong alibis for the night of the assault and cooperated fully with investigators. They provided their DNA and shoe prints for analysis, which all came back clear. On March 16, 2011, 5 days after the incident, Brittany was interviewed again. When asked about the type of car Jana drove, she claimed not to know. The interview ended shortly after. On March 18, Brittany met with detectives for a third interview. This time, she confessed that she did know what Jana's car looked like because the attackers had forced her to move it. She explained that the men had made her drive Jana's car away from the store before assaulting her. They threatened her life, claiming they were watching her, and warned that they would kill her if she did not return quickly. While moving the car, she spotted a police officer nearby but did not reach out for help, fearing for her safety. Despite her explanation, police began to doubt Brittany's honesty. A significant inconsistency arose from her previous statements that both she and Jana had been assaulted, as evidenced by their pants being slashed. However, after 6 days into the investigation, forensic testing revealed surprising results. No evidence of abuse assault was found. The only DNA collected from the scene belonged to Jana and Brittany. There was no trace of any male DNA, and the samples from 2 waiters did not match anything from the crime scene. Investigators focused on an important detail: the footprints. All the prints were found inside the store. If the attackers had come in from outside, there should have been some evidence of their entry or exit, but there was none. This left police with 2 possibilities: either the attackers changed shoes inside the store, which seemed unlikely, or they never entered from the outside at all. Furthermore, the smaller footprints at the scene matched Brittany's shoes, while the larger prints were from a size 14 shoe. Initially, this suggested an unidentified male suspect. However, when investigators checked the store's inventory, they discovered that the larger shoes belonged to Loyoman's stockroom. They were part of the store's inventory. This raised an important question: if 2 men ambushed Jana and Brittany, why would they take the time to change into store-brand shoes during such a violent act? It didn't make sense. Meanwhile, employees at the nearby Apple store shared something unsettling with the police. Around 10:30 p.m. on the night of the attack, they heard a loud argument coming from Lululemon. Several staff members, including a security guard, reported clearly hearing 2 women arguing, with one of them pleading, "Talk to me, please don't do this." "What's happening?" Their conversation was accompanied by crashing sounds, which indicated a struggle and something heavy being dragged across the floor, yet no one heard a man's voice at any point. At one moment, someone was heard whispering, "God, please help me." Unfortunately, nobody at the Apple store called the police. They assumed the noise was just a workplace dispute, some internal drama. They had no idea that Jana was fighting for her life just a few feet away. As detectives uncovered more evidence, their suspicions about Brittany grew stronger. Investigators delved into her past and discovered a troubling detail: Brittany had a hidden history that predated her employment at the Lululemon store. In college, she developed a reputation for stealing. Friends, roommates, and teammates began to notice that their belongings, money, clothes, and makeup, were going missing. This frequent stealing led to gossip, and eventually, her kleptomaniac behavior was officially reported. As a result, Brittany lost her scholarship and was expelled from school. By 2007, she moved to Maryland and began working at a hotel, where she quickly achieved a managerial position. However, history repeated itself when coworkers discovered that she was stealing from them, leading to her termination. Despite her troubled background, Brittany had aspirations. She wanted to become a personal trainer and hoped to open her own fitness center one day. Her job at Lululemon was intended to be temporary, serving as a stepping stone toward her bigger dreams. She and Jana were co-workers and got along well enough. There was no indication of any personal conflict between them. So what sparked the tragic event? That evening, before the store closed, employees followed their usual protocol, which included a mandatory bag check to prevent theft. Jana was assigned to check Brittany's bag and discovered something suspicious: a pair of Lululemon leggings with the tag still attached. Rather than confront Brittany directly, Jana reported the finding to their manager, who assured her that she would address the issue the following morning. Later that night, after the store had closed and all employees had gone home, Brittany reached out to Jana, claiming she had left her Metro card inside and needed help retrieving it. Jana, being kind and willing to assist, agreed to come back. What followed is thought to have been a confrontation, with Brittany potentially pleading with Jana not to report her and trying to avoid being fired again. However, when Jana remained steadfast in her decision, the situation escalated. Investigators believe Brittany attacked Jana using tools from the store, such as a wrench, a hammer, and a box cutter. As Jana fought to escape and attempted to reason with Brittany, the violence escalated to a horrifying level. After killing Jana, Brittany moved her car to a different spot to create an alibi and hide her actions. A witness later saw Brittany in the vehicle, and nearly 90 minutes later, she was still there, likely planning her next move. Brittany returned to the store, put on size 14 shoes she found there, and staged the scene to appear as if a robbery had gone wrong. She messed up the store, stole cash from the registers, and then inflicted minor injuries on herself before using zip ties to bind her wrists and ankles. She placed herself in the bathroom and waited until morning, when her co-workers discovered the horrifying scene. This was a calculated attempt to shift suspicion away from herself. Tragically, Jaina lost her life over a pair of stolen leggings. On March 18, 2011, exactly 1 week after the incident, Brittany Norwood was arrested. Prosecutors faced a challenge. They had to demonstrate that this was not an impulsive act of violence but a premeditated murder. If they succeeded, Brittany would receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole. However, her defense team aimed for a lesser charge of second-degree murder, arguing that she had acted out of panic in the moment. The trial began in October 2011. Lead prosecutor John McCarthy portrayed Brittany as manipulative and a compulsive liar. He presented strong forensic evidence and pointed out inconsistencies in her account to show that she had planned the attack. Meanwhile, the defense acknowledged that Brittany had killed Jaina but contended that it was not premeditated, framing it as a tragic situation where she lost control. The details revealed a chilling truth. Jaina didn't die quickly. She fought fiercely, leaving a trail of blood as she tried to escape. She endured a brutal 20-minute attack and was aware of what was happening for most of that time. This level of violence indicated that the act was premeditated, not impulsive. The jury quickly reached a verdict, finding Brittany Norwood guilty of first-degree murder after only an hour of deliberation. On January 27, 2012, Brittany was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge described the murder as cold-blooded, planned, and ruthless, condemning the calculated actions Brittany took after the crime. He also criticized the employees at the Apple store for ignoring Jaina's cries for help, labeling their inaction as callous indifference. In 2015, Brittany's final appeal was denied. She remains incarcerated at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. The calculated murder by her co-worker Brittany Norwood, driven by a desperate attempt to conceal a minor theft, revealed a chilling capacity for deceit and violence. Norwood's life sentence without parole delivered justice, but it could not restore the bright future Jaina had been on the cusp of achieving. Jaina's memory endures as a beacon of light, reminding us to remain vigilant against the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of everyday interactions.